call the meeting of the Board of Supervisors to order. Today is Thursday, June 15th, 2017. It is just after 8:30 a.m. We're in the Community Center at the Sierra Room at 851 East William Street. We're also streaming on the internet. Could we have a roll call for the official record, please? Thanks, Sue.
Good morning. Supervisor Bond?
Here.
Supervisor Bonkowski?
Here.
Supervisor Bagwell?
Here.
Supervisor Barrett?
Here.
Mayor Kroll?
Here.
Have a
Thank you,
quorum.
Sue. Could we call on our good friend Nick Emery of the Good Shepherd Wesleyan Church to get us started off today? And Nick has got his two daughters with him. Come on up. Oh, one daughter doesn't want to. There she is. Okay.
Let's pray. Father God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for this great community. We thank you for our leaders and our servant leaders. We pray for our first responders and our police officers, God, and we just pray that you would keep them safe and that you would protect them. We pray for the events of our community. There's a lot of special stuff happening in the month of June and even this weekend, and we pray that that event would go well and be safe, Father God. And we pray that the governing of our community would go efficiently, that you would give wisdom and knowledge to these leaders and to those who advise them, and that you would bless them and encourage them. Thank you for our community, and thank you for this day. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Nick. Could we have a moment of silence to think about the events that transpired yesterday in our nation's capital and the shooting, and just kind of bring it home? One of the young men, Matt Mika, just happens to be a good friend of my oldest son, Brad. So just as kind of a way to say, you know, these things affect all of us in different ways. So we'll have a moment of silence. Thank you very much. All right. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. Now we'll need to take up item number 5, public comment. This is the time for public comment on any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of this body. Anybody? Anybody want to speak? Anybody? Hope, come on up. No?
Not today.
Not today? All right. Anybody else? I don't see any. We take public comment generally where it's appropriate when we discuss the business items that are on the agenda, and we'll take public comment, various, recognized agendaed public comment throughout the day, and then tonight we'll have another board meeting and additional public comment. All right, so we had a chance to look at the minutes of May 18th. Everybody had a chance to do that? Supervisor Bonkowski.
I move to approve the minutes of the Carson City Board of Supervisors for May 18th, 2017 as presented.
Motion and second. A couple seconds on the motion. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried. Thank you. Let's, on the agenda, I know of two, I think we have the water agreement ready to go with a couple changes. We'll see. Also, I believe that we want to pull the CAMA contract with DevNet, and the city managers, I think, has talked to everybody about that one. So that's
Item
15B.
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 15
okay.
Bravo.
So we'll pull 15B. Any members of the public want anything pulled for special consideration or anything? Board members, you want anything? No? Okay.
Yeah, so I'd like an explanation on why we're pulling that.
You want to give it, I don't know all of it. I understand that the contractor has asked that the contract, that they revisit the contract a little bit, I think is what it is.
Correct.
Okay. All right. But I just want everybody to, I know, it's kind of somewhat arcane in a way when we talk about these IT things. This is an important project for our community in terms of the assessor's office ability and also for the treasurer to conduct their businesses. So we will be, it's not lost to any of us the importance of getting these things right. So that's where we'll be going, okay? All right. Any other changes to the agenda, board? Anybody? I don't see any. Okay. So let's go down to the floor and we'll do the proclamation for Alzheimer's. And I'd like to call up Jacob Harmon, and then we'll have a, presentation to our employees. Good morning. This morning we're going to issue a proclamation called Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness, June 2017, and it reads as follows. Whereas today there are 5.5 million Americans living with Alzheimer's dementia, a figure that is expected to grow to as many as 16 million by mid-century if scientists don't develop a cure or an effective treatment. 16 million. Whereas there are currently more than 43,000 people with Alzheimer's dementia living in our state, over 1,100 of whom are in Carson City, and additionally another 3,300 caregivers in Carson City who are caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's. And whereas researchers are making great progress in developing ways to accurately diagnose and treat Alzheimer's disease, and the federal and state governments need to accelerate the pace of that research to develop disease-altering treatment by 2025. And whereas the Alzheimer's Association is marking June as Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, and Wednesday, June 21st, as the longest day, and asking residents of Carson City to visit www.alz.org. That's www.alz.org to learn more about Alzheimer's dementia, share the facts, and take action in our community. Therefore, we designate June as Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, and June 21st as the longest day in our community, Carson City. And we have with us Jacob Harmon, who's wants to say a few words. So Jacob, on behalf of all of us here, the board, please accept this proclamation and tell us a little bit more.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Board of Supervisors, I appreciate the opportunity and your recognition of this growing challenge in Nevada, Northern Nevada particularly. We have 3 support groups here in Carson City. We also maintain an office at the Carson City Senior Center to help families on a walk-in basis. So if you all, the biggest help that you all can be is if you know someone who is struggling with Alzheimer's or related dementia, please refer them to our website. All of our services are free and they're offered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we appreciate your support and your recognition. This partnership between the public sector and the Alzheimer's Association has changed the trajectory of this disease, and we look forward to your continued partnership. Thank you.
Now come up, we'll get a picture. How's that? Awesome. Come on up here. Okay, you bet. We're now going to take a few minutes to recognize and celebrate the employees who make Carson City a great place to live, work, and play, and create a quality of life that is, in my view, and I think all of us here in this room, an unparalleled quality of life. And so, on behalf of Carson City, I want to first issue a longevity award to William Hughes. Attention, William. Hi, come on up. Come on. I didn't see you sitting right there in the front. Oh. Where is he?
I just called. He's tied up at home doing something. So
Okay, well, he's for 5 years. Okay, you want to get his picture too?
I don't want. I just wanted to get the award. I just wanted to get his award.
Why don't we do a picture anyway? Then you can tell him, hey, that's all right.
Take his picture from the, okay.
Come on up there anyway. Come on up there, right? Come on.
cool.
Okay,
Thanks.
all right. I wonder what that was all about there. You didn't tell me about that one.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Okay. All right. Next we have Jonathan Pedrini, works with as a firefighter paramedic. Yeah, Jonathan. I understand you're known by the name Rockstar.
I don't know about that.
Huh? Rockstar. It's good to see the boys. I call them the boys and girls in blue. It's wonderful. So, Jonathan, on behalf of a grateful community and appreciation of 10 years of continuous and dedicated service to Carson City, please accept our congratulations. We look forward to 10 more years. Thank you very much. So, come on up here too. All right. Could I call Karen? Oh, I know this, Karen. This is a great day for, I say that because I see Karen every day, and she's a senior property appraiser in the assessor's office, and she's been with us for 15 years in Carson City, and one of the things that kind of makes my day, I walk into City Hall, and I know we all walk in there from time to time, but there's always a smile, and there's always a nice conversation and chat about what's going on in life, and it makes things worth living to see that, and so keep that smile up and keep up the good work. You can lower the appraisals if you want. That's okay. You lower the. Did I say that really? Anyway, on the record, okay. All right, Karen. On behalf of a grateful community, please accept this certificate of appreciation for 15 years of continuous dedicated service to Carson City, dated today. Thanks, Karen. Okay. Come on up here. John Easterling. Hi, John. Fire captain. Man, 20 years. So what do you think about 20 years? How's it been for 20 years to do it here?
It's been a good ride. Yeah.
Huh?
Still having fun.
Well, I understand, that you're an extremely important part of our fire department and our our public safety folks, John, and on behalf of a grateful community, and I know you got some of our folks here with you, and I want you to come up here. We're terribly proud and glad that you've been here for 20 years. You've done wonders to make Carson City a better place. Thanks, John. Come on. Okay. Becky. Okay. Sheriff, you want to come up here? All right. Becky. Hi, Becky. I asked him to come up here. Becky is the administrative assistant to the sheriff here. And so we're going to give you a certificate for how many years, Kenny? And then
5 years.
25 years. Kenny, I want you to say, I know it's hard for you to say good words, but go ahead.
25 years. She's been through 3 sheriffs, and keeping my ass in line is probably one of the biggest challenges that she's ever had. Well, you tried to get a cut on your taxes. Becky, I so much happens with you at the center of it, and I sincerely appreciate everything you do. Thank God for you.
Come on up, Becky. Come on up here. Good job. All right.
Do you have any friends, coworkers, family members that like
If you have any friends,
to come to the picture? Now would be a
What?
good time.
Come on, everybody who's here to celebrate, come on up. Everybody, if you're in uniform, come on. Rachel, you're gonna have to find a way to get us all in here.
I'll make it work. Okay, so can you scoot it a little bit more to the right?
Somebody's got to protect the mayor from the sheriff. Wide angle?
No, this is perfect.
Thanks, guys. That's pretty cute, huh?
hey, would you take this one up there?
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Oh, what's that abatement? Yeah. What's that abatement?
Okay, let's now take up, we'll go to the consent agenda. Any member of the public want anything pulled from the consent agenda? Any member of the board for special consideration? Okay, I think we're okay with the consent agenda. Motion is ordered for the consent agenda. Somebody want to make it? Supervisor Bagwell, go.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented for items 9, 10, 11, and 12.
There's a motion and a second on the motion. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Carried unanimous. Thank you. Let's now pick up item 14. This is the second reading on bill number 113 relating to the airport. I'm going to disclose that and abstain from voting on this, and because my partner, who's going to, even though I'm retired, he's a close friend of mine. I'm going to incorporate all the statements I made during the first reading of this. I'm going to turn the gavel over to the Mayor Pro Tem.
Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Steve Takis, Airport Council.
Have there been any changes since the first reading or any objections since the first reading?
No, there have not. The only update I can give you is that I took back the suggestions that Supervisor Bonkowski made about doing this on a more frequent basis to the chairman. It's not something I can send to all the board members because we don't, our first open meeting after that suggestion was made will be next week, which time I'll do that. But I took those to the chairman, and she completely agreed. We need to put this on a regular schedule, and or trigger it by any substantial changes on the airport. For example, construction of a new block of hangars would change the calculation, or any other major expense or revenue change would trigger changes. And so I just want to report back that suggestion was received very favorably by the chairman, and I expect that's what the authority will implement when they get together to decide that. But in terms of the ordinance, no changes.
Board, do you have any questions? Is there any public comment on this issue? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the board.
Ordinance number.
2017-13.
I move to adopt on second reading Bill number 113, ordinance number 2017-13, an ordinance amending the Carson City Municipal Code Title 19, Airport Rules and Regulations, Section 19.03.060, through the fence fees, to adjust for the current cost of airport maintenance and updated airport hangar space and parking area.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? And one abstention. All right. All right, I will turn the gavel back over to the mayor. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay, let's now take up item 15A. This is possible contract number 1718-008. Possible approval of a joint contract with Thomas Petroleum, Carson Valley Oil, and Flyers Energy through the state of Nevada RFQ contract 3064. Ms. Rader, are you going to do this one? And you got with you Zach. So give us the top line numbers and what we're doing here, then tell us the nuts and bolts. Okay.
All right. Good morning. Laura Rader, Purchasing and Contracts. This is to approve contract 1718-008, joinder contract with Thomas Petroleum, Carson Valley Oil, Flyers Energy through the state of Nevada for bulk fuel and delivery services, and with Thomas Petroleum for card lock fueling for an amount not to exceed $875,640 from the various fuel city accounts. This is an annual renewal that we do every year.
Zach, you want to add anything?
Yeah, just good morning. Zach Good, Carson City Fleet Supervisor. This is basically what gives all of our fuel to everything from our landfill to our first responders and everything from card lock to bulk fueling. So it just takes care of the city, and we operate on the state contract and been exercising this for the last couple of years.
Okay. Public comment on this issue? Board. Comment or motions in order?
I move to approve contract number 1718-008, a joinder contract with Thomas Petroleum LLC, Carson Valley Oil Company, and Flyers Energy LLC through the State of Nevada RFQ, contract number 3064, Amendment 1, for bulk fuel and delivery services with the Thomas Petroleum LLC through the State of Nevada RFQ, contract number 3125, Cardlock Fueling Network for an amount not to exceed $875,640 from various city fuel accounts as approved in the fiscal year 18 budget.
There's a motion and a couple seconds on the motion. Discussion. Hearing and seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Carried unanimous. Thank you. All right, 15 Bravo has been pulled. That's the DevNet contract. Let's now take up the Minden water agreement. This is item number 16. This is interlocal agreement to provide wholesale water service. I see we've got the good learned hand here, Daniel Yu, and our Public Works Director, Darren Schultz, 1 of 10. Okay. And I see in the background there we've got the Carson City star litigator, Ryan Russell. And he is a star. He's smiling, but that's what I call him anyway. By the way, did you get reelected, Ryan? I did. I didn't see that. Okay. So just before we start, Ryan Russell is now, again, the representative for Carson City on the State Board of Bar Examiners, State Board of Bar Governors. Okay? Thanks. All right, go for it.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and Supervisors. I'm happy to be here before the board this morning in lieu of Jason Woodbury. He wasn't able to attend to make the presentation on behalf of the DA's office. He's wrapped up in trial today, as you all know, so I'm happy to be here in his stead. I was involved in the negotiations which culminated in this finalized version of the agreement over the course of the last several months, nearly a year actually since we first started negotiations with all the parties that have been interested. For the last several weeks, I've pretty much stayed out of the fray, and I want to give credit where credit is due. Jason really has taken the lead as point man on getting into the weeds and getting through all the rate components and the appendices and really all the provisions with the complicated material. That's not to deflect my responsibility today in answering any questions that the supervisors may have, but I just wanted to give credit where credit is due. This agreement, as you know, was really triggered because of an issue that the parties had last year with respect to one of the provisions that was contained in a proposed second amendment to the original agreement between the parties. That resulted in Carson City paying under protest certain rate amounts over the last several months. The parties did decide to get together under this dispute resolution process, come together and really negotiate in good faith what the parties all believe is representative of good faith efforts and really beneficial interest to all the parties that are involved. I do have here with me Darren Schultz, our Public Works Director, who can answer any questions with relation to the specific rate components. You know, the engineering side of things really above and beyond my pay grade, not really in my wheelhouse, I would say. Don't have any engineering specifics in my mind. So with rate flow, anything like that, I'll defer to Darren. If I inadvertently misrepresent any of the nuanced provisions of this agreement, I will also turn behind and ask Ryan Russell to join us. He really also was kind of involved in the nitty-gritty details and hammering out this contract with Jason from my office. So without further ado, I just kind of want to hit some of the main points of this agreement. This agreement, as you know, is between four parties. That's Carson City, that's Indian Hills, that's Douglas County, that's the town of Minden. It's for really to facilitate the intertie system, water line intertie system, to deliver water to Carson City as a wholesale customer. The rate components are all established under the terms of this agreement. This agreement supersedes and incorporates the provisions of all the previous agreements. So we think it's good in the sense that it's a universal agreement. It's a holistic approach to everything, and it provides additional transparency, not just to all the parties involved, but to the members of the public as well. So basically, it's all inclusive. We don't have to look at various different documents and try to determine what is going on here with the delivery of water. We have provisions in here that call for ensuring the water quality for delivery to the wholesale customers. This is a term in perpetuity for the contract. It can only be terminated upon mutual agreement of all the parties, or unless, of course, a court of competent jurisdiction intervenes and says that, hey, there's been some sort of a dispute that the court needs to adjudicate. We're hoping that that will not be the case, and as I said, the parties have worked, very well together over the last several months to hammer something out that we think we can maintain for the foreseeable future. This represents a purchase of beneficial water rights by Carson City in the amount of $1.5 million. This is to be paid in annual installments equally of $75,000 over the next 20 years. This represents a beneficial interest in that water of approximately 187.5 additional acre feet. That's on top of the 2690 acre feet that was already pursuant to the previous agreements. We think that that is, something that is obviously, good for Carson City in terms of future growth and what we're going to be projected to need. It's a good purchase. Additional add-ons to this agreement would be in the attachments which reflect the different rate components. As I said, I'm happy to answer any questions, specific questions you may have with regard to that. I also wanted to mention that a couple of things here. There was a lot of discussion and consideration in previous meetings with regard to a proposed additional column for that rate component, and that was, the construction funds, basically, the construction loan repayment. That has been eliminated, that's taken out, so just wanted to emphasize that point. The parties agreed to that. That really sort of settles, the vast majority of the disputes that were occurring prior to today's meeting, which is the first time that this board is being presented with these finalized terms and agreements. I'll also add that staff for all the parties to this agreement are in support of the terms and conditions of this universal agreement. So everyone is on board with what we have here, to be presented for your consideration and hopefully your adoption. I also do want to add, finally, before we answer any specific questions you may have, that the parties last night realized that there were two additional provisions, mostly non-substantive, I would say, and does not really impact Carson City, that were inadvertently left out of previous drafts. And that really just happened because of the shuffling around of various versions, and really for lack of a better phrase, the result of having, more than one cook in the kitchen, so to speak. I will read those additional provisions onto the record here for absolute clarity. This is with respect to item 2E under water rights for the contract. The wholesale parties reserve the right to assign and collect rates, fees, or charges for any of their respective water rights conveyed to the town for future development within the town, the county, IHGID, or Carson City. Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the only change here was the inclusion of IHGID. Is that correct? Right?
Inclusion of IHGID and the town.
And the town.
Ryan, why don't you just come on up to the table up there?
And
We
Ryan, I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
We understand you're representing, and I know you got the clients.
Just want to make sure I don't speak out of turn here.
Mr. Mayor, Ryan Russell on behalf of the town of Minden. It's the inclusion of the town and IHGID in the last provision of that sentence. From our standpoint, they are in the county, so it's truly a non-substantive change, and the town has no issue with it.
So that is, I agree, that's a technical change only. It's non-substantive. It's incorporated by reference throughout, the provisions for the rest of the contract. I can say on behalf of the DA's office for Carson City, we are not opposed to that change. In fact, that is language.
Just the reference again on the contract, where?
2EI.
2EI, under water rights.
Dan, can you reread it, please?
I'll read that entire provision again. 2E, water rights, I. The wholesale parties reserve the right to assign and collect rates, fees. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. The wholesale customers reserve the right to assign and collect rates, fees, or charges for any of their respective water rights conveyed to the town for future development within the town, the county, IHGID, or Carson City. So as you can see, that's merely a clerical change, technical in nature.
Next change?
The next change is 4D of the contract under annual review. I'll give you a second to get to that page.
It's page 11 in the presentation materials.
Page 11 of the supporting materials. So I won't read the entire paragraph, I'll just read the last sentence that's proposed for inclusion here. And this starts with, or after infrastructure, period. The new sentence would be, should the town unilaterally proceed?
Wait, you gotta, I think I know where it's going, but you said the entire paragraph's really long. This is, the paragraph talks about annual review.
That's correct.
And the last sentence starts, in no event shall any party. Is that, where are you starting?
So that would be the last sentence of that existing provision.
Is there any change to the last sentence?
No, it's a tack on after that sentence, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
So after the period behind infrastructure, concluding that last sentence, the additional provision would be, should the town unilaterally proceed with any future development, construction of new wholesale assets on its wholesale water system, it shall be solely responsible for the cost thereof unless and until the wholesale customers derive benefit therefrom. So again, it's not an onus on Carson City. It's language that was previously vetted and agreed to by the parties mutually, and just as a result of so many different versions of the contract being shuffled amongst the parties, it just kind of got lost in the shuffle. So that was something that, one of the attorneys to this process brought up late last night, and it fell on our radar, and so we wanted to make that presentation to the board today. Again, Carson City's DA's office, we do not have an objection to the inclusion of that language. Ryan does not either on behalf of the town of Minden, so we're fine with that.
So just a question on that provision. Does the rest of the document give it that it's mutually agreed when that beneficial right occurs? Because they're going to do the wholesale until we determine that there's beneficial use to the other wholesale customers. What's the provision that kicks that off?
That's my understanding. I'm going to kick it over to Ryan just to make sure I haven't, lost any of the nuances here of that provision.
Supervisor Bagwell, this sentence is agreeable to the town. In fact, we were willing to include it because it's consistent with the entire amendment to these agreements. By unifying all the parties and requiring them to meet annually, we've also agreed to share our capital improvement plans. And from Minden's standpoint right now, there are no wholesale assets on its capital improvement plan. And so in order to put one on there, the requirement in the annual review is that we disclose that, give all the parties the ability to weigh in on its feasibility, necessity, and benefit. And so it's basically an extension of what the contract already says.
Go, Karen and Brad.
And Ryan, maybe you can best explain this. Just for the record and for complete clarity, how or what method will be used to reconcile the actual cost of water delivery annually?
There's going to be two ways that that annual review for the reconciliation is used for two purposes. One, to see if there was either an overpayment or underpayment based on the actual cost that staff will put together. This is the amount of time, the amount of water, how much it costs, treatment, et cetera. And this is what you paid. It's also going to inform the coming year because we'll use those actuals to plug in to the rate structure that we now have. And we've also included a provision that each wholesale customer provide its own projections for the coming year. The idea being streamlining this process so that every year we're really, really close. And I think that will work benefits on several planes for what it's worth. The prior agreements required a rate study every 3 years. And one, a rate study is very expensive. And two, it puts us 3 years out, so there is sticker shock when the rates come out. in this situation, the staff is going to be collaborating at least annually, not only to increase efficiencies in the system, but to ensure that the rate is actually accurately reflecting the actual cost of delivery.
A couple items. The first one is for you, Darren, on the rates to Douglas County. There's a depreciation component, and on the rates to Minden, town of Minden, there is an operations and maintenance component and a future treatment component. And there's annual increases to these three components. At what point in the future do you think that those components stabilize and stop going up? At some point, what it looks like is that these line items are being funded initially. And at what point are you envisioning that they would stabilize and would not continue to go up on an annual basis, except by reconciliation or need?
Darren Schultz, Public Works, for the record. So the depreciation through the depreciation columns, from what you have in your schedule, that last highest rate is the number that should go on into the future. So we phase that depreciation in over time, and that's that last high number there you see that should not go up based on what we know now. And then your question was on what other column?
Operations and maintenance and future treatment.
Okay, so operations and maintenance, that's kind of what Ryan was talking about in terms of what we estimate. There's a slight factor on there in terms of just costs due to staffing costs, staffing increases, as well as chemicals, that sort of thing, in terms of those going up on a yearly basis. So those are, for probably forever, those are going to ink up slightly. I think the idea of once we can get together every year and look at these actual costs, we can zero in that, more consistently. But I don't feel like that's ever going to just flatline out. It'll probably go up slightly, just like we see within our system. Future treatment, this is something that we talk about every year, and I think it's appropriate to put on the record, but the number one goal for Carson City with this Minden Douglas water was to be able to blend it with our water, and we have two problems with our water that we're working with right now, and one is on the east side of town is high arsenic, and on the west side of town is high uranium. And as those standards fluctuate at the national level, we have to be prepared to meet those standards. And so the idea of bringing this water in was to blend it with our current water, and it reduces the amount that's in there. The concern that I have and the group has as a whole is eventually, I believe, this is just my opinion, that the arsenic, in terms of what's being pumped in Minden, that arsenic level is going to go up and eventually start knocking on the door of where the standard is, just over time. I don't know if that's going to happen in 10 years or 50 years, but in all likelihood, that's going to happen. The other thing that we have against us is, if you look at the last few decades, the standards for both arsenic and uranium have ticked down from the government in terms of what we have to meet. So that component is to prepare for the future, so when the day does come, and it will come, it's just a matter of when, that we have to treat further, that there's some funding there for it.
And then my next question is, not a question, just a clarification, is for Dan and Ryan. There were two additional items in the contract that I had asked, just for efficiency's sake, that we look at going forward. We don't need to address it in this contract, but going forward. The first is on page 5. It's item 2E III, and that is to set the methodology for when the water rights pricing is set, so that if we have excess water usage that we then lease, that we know what that number is in advance rather than after the fact. And then the other item was on page 10. It's 4C double I. So there's a provision in here for transferring excess reserves from the water rate stabilization account into the water treatment reserve account. And it only describes that transfer to happen promptly. And there's nothing that says what promptly is defined as. But then there's an additional provision that says that if there's a deficiency at the end of the year in operations and maintenance, then the town can draw funds from the rate stabilization. My concern is that if we are constantly drawing money out of the rate stabilization and putting it into the treatment account during the year, that we may draw that down and there might not be sufficient funds. So it makes more sense for me logistically to keep the funds in the water stabilization rate till the end of the year when it's reconciled, then move the excess over to the treatment account. So neither one of these are, they're more just clarifications and efficiency items, but I would like us to look at both of those going forward.
John.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I recognize the devil is in the details, but as a new guy reading this, the details, they didn't overwhelm me, but they're big. So I'm going to ask a broader question, and that is, could you explain again for the record and the public just what we're buying here and what we're not buying? Because you and I have had this discussion before, Darren, about whether we're buying water or whether we're buying other things. And delineate that from the new water that we're getting.
Okay, so yes, Darren Schultz for the record. So this is going back to the project that we started talking about 10 years ago. And we are, Minden has unused water rights in their basin that either needed to be used, or you have to prove them up. You have to somehow show the state that you still require those rights, or they're subject to go away. So that was Minden's, what they brought to the table. What Carson City was needing, what I talked about, was a way to blend our existing water to make it useful to us, safe to drink, and also to come up with an additional source of water to provide to the city. When I say a source of water, you have to look at two components of that. The first one is the actual water rights that Carson City owns over a year. Those are calculated on a yearly basis. How many water rights that you're allowed to use out of groundwater. The second component of that is actual quantity of water on a daily basis. So how much can you produce on any given day to meet the demand in your system? It's not so much has to do with, acre feet that you're going to use over a year, but any given day, everybody turns their sprinklers on at once. How much can you produce? And so those are the two things that we went into in terms of Carson City, that we went and that's why the deal was brokered. So what you're getting today is a component, a water coming to Carson City that we are using to blend with our existing water. We're paying for that on a per 1,000 gallon basis, and that's the rate that's included here. The other thing that you have before you is purchasing additional water rights from the town of Minden that will become Carson City's rights, and that we're going to be allowed to pump as needed.
And is the new rate a good one? As I understand it, it is, from your view.
Yes, the current rate where we are now is a good one. I'm very satisfied with where we are now and can recommend that this is the right direction to be going.
The reason I ask these questions is that the public often thinks that we're going down and getting water from Douglas County, and to an extent, it's already our water, is what you're saying?
That's correct.
Where are we in terms of the political jurisdictions approving this?
Mr. Mayor, I believe, and Ryan, again, you can correct me, is that this is on the agenda for Douglas County later on this afternoon. Is that correct?
You're going first, Mr. Mayor. Douglas County goes this afternoon. It's agendized for a special meeting of the Mindentown Board on Monday, and I believe Indian Hills is hearing it next Thursday.
Mr. Schultz, tell me why this is a good agreement for Carson City.
This is a great agreement for Carson City. We are getting additional water so that we're not overtaxing our current sources. We are getting additional good water in that it's better than our additional sources. And we're also getting additional water rights, which just builds us out for the future, prepares us for the future needs. So, and the rate, that's what we've talked a lot about over the last year, is the rate that we're paying for it. We have went through that in detail, and what we have here today is, it's spot on, it's fair, it's the right number to be paying for Carson City.
Brad.
If I could add to that, Darren, I think, we've been able to clean up the contract for the benefit of all four parties. There were some issues in the previous contract that came up, obviously a year ago. So now I think that we have a document that we can all agree on and will serve us far into the future without having to come back and go through dispute resolution again.
And if I could add as well, Darren, can you just kind of quote the number of what it would take to build a treatment plant to deal with the uranium and the arsenic issue in our water, which is the purpose for the blending?
Yes, absolutely. That's a good question. My numbers are a little outdated, but I assure you they have not went down. So for a uranium treatment plant, which would be required for the west side of town, that water, we estimated about a $30 million treatment plant. Then the problem with taking uranium out of the water is you have to dispose of it. And so we were looking at $1 to $2 million a year to dispose of that uranium. Then you go to the east side of town in terms of arsenic. That varies a lot depending on where you're going to put those plants or how many or one. But it's somewhere between $10 and $20 million for arsenic treatment.
So the follow-up question to that, that's fine, you build a treatment plant, so we spend $50 million to build the 2 treatment plants, and then the federal government comes in and lowers the standards again. What happens to those treatment plants? Do you scrap them and have to build new ones, or can you add on to them or enhance them to meet the lower limits, and what does that cost?
Yes, we would design those treatment plants, whether it's ours, whether it's in Minden, we would design those to be able to try and keep up with standards. I say that with a caveat that, if eventually it goes to zero, where, that scrap all that. But no, we would design those treatment plants to operate just like we're doing at our wastewater treatment plant. We design it for where we're at now to meet the standards, but modifications can be made in the future to come down to a lower level. If and when it comes to the closer you have to remove arsenic or uranium out of the water, the closer you get to zero, the cost goes up exponentially in terms of what it takes to treatment, what it takes to treat. Yeah, we're not talking millions. It's now tens of millions that you would add onto those plants as the number goes down.
Any other board questions? Public comment? Anybody? Okay, somebody want to try a motion?
Resolution number?
2017 R21.
I move to adopt resolution number 2017 R21, a resolution approving and authorizing the mayor to sign the interlocal agreement to provide wholesale water service, an agreement by and between Carson City, the town of Minden, Douglas County, and the Indian Hills General Improvement District to include the non-substantive changes that were made today at today's hearing.
There's a motion by Supervisor Abel, second by Supervisor Bonkowski on the motion. Discussion?
Just discussion.
Discussion's in order.
Just in general, I want to thank all the parties for working so hard to improve the agreement for all the water users. I know that it seemed a little odd that Carson City rejected it a year ago, thinking that we needed changes, but I think in the end, we have a great product for all the wholesale customers. So Carson City, Douglas, Indian Hills. So again, thanks for all the effort and work. I know it was a lot, but thank you.
What she said.
I'm reminded as we go through this, when we're talking about water, safe drinking water, when we went down the road a few years ago when I was first mayor to start building the pipeline from Douglas County, actually from the town of Minden here, and we were having to do some rate increases for that to meet the Safe Drinking Water Act. And a friend of mine who was testifying then said, you know, why do you have to do that? And I said, well, it's the law. And they said, and I, to this day I remember, she said, well, ask the DA, what happens if you don't do it, Mayor? And of course, the DA said, well, you go to jail. And that was sort of facetious, but it's not lost on me. You know, when we talk about safe drinking water issues, it's not lost on me that last night and today there's a news item out of Flint, Michigan. 5 public officials or employees are all being indicted for involuntary manslaughter for failure to treat the water. And now they have a bunch of folks there with Legionnaire's disease. So these things, even though we can quibble and talk about whether safe drinking water is the right level or whatever, there are things that are important for quality of life, and there are things for the sanctity of life as well that we deal with here. And I want to echo what Supervisor Bagwell and Supervisor Barrett said, that you know, agreements like this between counties and between jurisdictions are extremely important. They show, one, cooperation, you know, which I think, you know, we all want to see us do, even though we have a jurisdictional line between us, where we make a concerted effort to build infrastructure that's to the benefit of, you know, where we share infrastructure costs between us on a regional basis. That's a big deal, and we don't see that type of cooperation happening in many parts, at least that I know of, in many parts of the United States. And so I think it's to the parties' credit. I'm not talking about this board. I'm just talking about the other parties to this agreement. As Lori said, that you know, this will serve well into the future, and it's something we need to, you know, that our kids and grandkids can look back on and say we did the right thing. You know, we may have to build a treatment plant down the road, but in the meantime, we have a safe community. So it's a big deal. And I also want to compliment the board, this board here, for reading. I know John said it was, John in his inimical way would say it's difficult to read. You know, he read every page, read every line, and I know every board member here did, and they all had comments and questions back to the you know, to the negotiating team to clarify things. And so it's a credit to our board as well that they get right in the middle of these things to figure out and make sure that they're in their own mind that this is in the public interest for Carson City. So I intend to vote for this, and I want to say thanks to all of you folks, and echo what Supervisor Bagwell said.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, just to let the board know that the town is very proud of this partnership, and as evidence of that, today in the audience you have the Minden Town manager and the chairman of the Minden Town board.
Welcome to Carson City. All right. Anything else, board? On the motion, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Carried unanimous. Thanks, folks. All right. We'll wait for a minute here, and then we'll take up mosquitoes. Okay, let's take up, are we on mosquitoes now? Okay, what's the item on this one? 17A, 17 alpha. Dustin, you ready to go? This is a presentation only. Mosquito abatement.
Yes.
You're ready to go.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Mayor and members of the board. Dustin Booth, a division manager at Carson City Health and Human Services. Today I'm here to talk to you briefly about the mosquito abatement activities that we do here in Carson. This is sort of a high overview of the community of our traditional sources. Traditional sources are noted in red, that we go through and do surveillance on a regular basis throughout our community. This is just sort of trying to show it a little bit better. I apologize that it's a little blurry. A lot of these sources are springs throughout town that have water either through the springtime or throughout all year, all summer long. So we have them all over the community. So what does it mean to do surveillance? We have staff that go out and look at these sites, and they use a device we call a dipper. In the bottom right-hand corner, it shows this dipper. It's a pole with a little cup on the end that we dip in the water, and we look for mosquito larvae and look for also the pupa to see if they're present in the water. We also use, on the left, it shows what's called a CO2 trap. So in the blue container on the top, we put dry ice, which attracts the mosquitoes. There's also a light. We put these out at night. And then come back in the morning and collect them and look for mosquitoes. Once we get the nets, we then get the mosquitoes separated out from the other bugs, and then they're classified by the different types of mosquitoes that we catch in there, and then those mosquitoes are tested for common viruses found in our community. So after we do our surveillance, then we do application. So so in the larger areas in the community, we utilize a helicopter and put out the product in the larger areas. Those two areas are the Anderson Ranch, Silver Saddle Ranch, and also the ponds over by the wastewater treatment facility. We use products in the aerial application that look a lot like sand. So one of the product there you could see it's Alticid. It looks like black sand. It works really great when it's spread out via the helicopter to get through the tules and also like the hoof prints of the cows that are left behind on Anderson Ranch. The white product is a product called Natural-R. We also utilize that in areas. We switch the products up so that we are treating the products with different products throughout the year. These products will also come in a solid form that they last from 28 days up to 180 days. So depending on the type of source, we'll use different types of product. Alticid is a product that contains a chemical called methoprene. Methoprene is an insect growth regulator. When mosquito larvae are exposed to this, it causes them to not emerge as adults. It is a target chemical that only affects mosquitoes, doesn't affect any other wildlife. So it's very good. The Natural-R product is a naturally occurring bacteria that the mosquitoes would eat, and it destroys them. So once again, these two products are very target-oriented. They go after mosquitoes and do not affect other insects in the environment or wildlife. Alticid. So the Alticid, the sand base we call XRG, that lasts about 21 days, and those are 21 wet days. So depending on where it is, if it's a flood irrigation area, it could be wet for 5 days and then dry up, and then once it's wet again, it would then have that ability. So when it dries, it doesn't release the chemical, and then it can be wet again and then release the chemical. So same with the Natural-R. The Alticid is for a 40-pound bag is $338 a bag, and the Natural-R is $538 a bag. We usually apply it at about 8 pounds per acre, so it is it's expensive, but it's also in regards to the labor of going out and trying to hand treat it in these large areas, it is cost effective. We also have the ability to do ground-based fogging. Ground-based fogging, we have a fogger that we would go out. When we fog, we need to go out at a certain time. It's weather dependent. We need to be out there early in the morning before the sun rises. This fog is an ultra low volume that goes out and puts out a pesticide that will, kill the mosquitoes, but also kill other insects. But it has to be done before the sun comes up. And also at low wind conditions, because we want the fog to lay, like as we drive down the streets, it literally is a fog going through a neighborhood to get in there, and the chemicals in there also stir the mosquitoes up, so they wake up early in the morning and then they come in contact with the pesticide and die. But we don't do this on a regular basis. We try to use the insect growth regulators, because when we do fogging, it does impact our other insects in the community. So for our overall budget that we have for product and helicopter application is $66,500. We do not have any FTEs 100% dedicated to mosquito abatement. We utilize our environmental health specialists to do that during the summer. Do you have any questions?
So, excuse me. So this season, do you anticipate you're going to need more than $66,000 worth to do it? I guess that's really why I asked for the agenda item, is if that's your normal application, do you see us having to do it more in a cycle, or you only get a chance when in the egg and that's it?
So in regards to our wet, our great winter and coming out of drought and having lots of water everywhere. So through the budget, I've been able to get a little extra for the month of June to handle what we have in our community. And then once July 1 comes with the new budget, where I probably see that we're going to have an issue is come next year, because the mosquito season crosses our fiscal year. So we'll be probably looking at, we're going to need some more money to address next May and June before the new budget year. So, but at this point, through savings and other line items, we've been able to get enough product to handle our situation right now. And then when July 1 comes, we'll see how the warm weather, it's a balance in regards to when the weather warms up, the mosquitoes can reproduce faster, but it also dries up some sources, but then also melts more snow in the mountains and brings more water down here. So it's this balance of looking at what's going on in the environment through our surveillance, and then doing treatment after our surveillance.
So I'm getting a lot of complaints from people that live out near Snyder, Schultz Ranch, Arena, all of that area, that they're pretty inundated in the mosquitoes. And I noticed that the two areas, I think, unless I misunderstood you, that you were doing the applications by the helicopter was Lampa Ranch and Anderson Ranch. What treatment are we doing out in the other area?
So when water's moving, it's mosquitoes don't like moving water. So when the river is moving, it's not as much of a problem. And but when the river recedes, we will then go down and treat those oxbows that are down there. I do know that this week in northern Nevada, we're all over. We're doing treatment. Washoe County was yesterday and today. We'll be doing treatment on Friday. Douglas County did treatment on Tuesday with some products in the Douglas County area. So we work with the Douglas County mosquito abatement program in regards to our shared border along the Carson River. So they did some treatment earlier this week in that area.
Dustin, this is just in the future to perhaps help with cost of mosquito abatement. But in some communities, and I know when we did the tour of the wastewater treatment plant, our old clarifier will be abandoned. And what they have done is raise the fish in the clarifiers that can be released into the river, so that when it goes low, those fish eat the mosquitoes, and there's minimal cost to dealing with that. So I just offered that up as a suggestion that you may want to look at in the future to help address this problem, so that you're not dealing with the total cost of chemicals.
Yeah. So we have some natural areas that have mosquito fish in those. They need to be mosquito fish need to be in areas that do not freeze, because so that they can winter over. We have tried to do some outside our own ponds years ago using treated wastewater effluent, and we applied bubblers to try to increase the oxygen. It just didn't work. But I mean, I'd be more than glad to look at at other projects that are looking at outside mosquito breeding. I know that our partners up at Washoe County do it inside, and then Southern Nevada Health District, they also do their mosquito fish breeding inside in a controlled environment. But we can look at that.
Dustin, I think I understand the 0 FTE, but it still must cost. What is the actual cost of the employee going out and doing this, and do you need more?
So several years ago, we used to have 3 environmental health specialists, and one of those environmental health specialists would spend about half time through the summer doing just dedicated mosquito work with help of the other 2. Now, since we've lost that 3rd environmental health specialist, now we just pick that up between myself and my other 2 staff, that we go out and we do surveillance. So it depends. That's why one of the reasons why we use products that last a long time is that we go out, we'll spend a week of intense going out and treating the areas that would then give us, 28 days or 21 to 30 days worth of treatment, so that then we can do the other duties that we have the rest of the time. So it usually about, we put about a week's worth of effort in every month working on that, because the product goes away and then we have to reapply it.
So that means you can't do something else when you're doing that.
Correct.
Yeah. And that's why I ask in this year, and you said it moves across the fiscal year, but this is the year when it's going to set it up, especially if we have another heavy winter. So I again ask, do you need more?
I mean, on wet years, I mean, the budget that we've had has sort of been designed on sort of our normal years. We've had this amount. We haven't seen this much water. So, our large treatments usually cost about $20,000, and so we get about 3 treatments out of this. If with wet months, I mean, we could have done treatment in May, but then I wouldn't have had money for a June treatment. So if there was an ability to get an additional $20,000, that would allow us for treatment costs. I mean, the other thing to look at is our budget is that any replacement costs. Usually on dry years, that's when we utilize this budget to do any equipment replacement that we need to do. So we just have always had a very small program that, depending on the year and the demand for the product, through savings, that's when we usually buy equipment.
So I just want to be clear. Do we need to worry about getting you another treatment cycle? Because what's the health risks for our community with the mosquito? That's really why I asked for the agenda item. Is I'm just concerned, just like water and everything else, what risk are we leaving our community?
So right now we're able to meet our goal for the our treatment cycle for the month of June, and then when July rolls around, we will have money to do that. It'll be next year, that next May and June, depending on our winter and our weather, that's where we'll need additional money at that point.
So we will need money potentially in the next fiscal year budget. So I just wanted to get it out on the record so that staff were kind of preparing for a potential of an augmentation need, because we definitely want to protect the public. Yes.
Good comments. All right, public comment, anybody? Anybody have a biting urge to testify? All right, I don't see any. Board, anybody? Okay, I don't see any, so thank you, Dustin.
Thank you.
Thanks to your folks over there, too. All right, we're moving all right this morning. The next item is to recess and go into redevelopment. What's your pleasure, Board? You want to take 5 or 10 minutes and come back for redevelopment?
We're getting nods.
All right, we'll be in recess for 10 minutes.
Yeah, there you go. All right. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Redevelopment Authority and let the record reflect that we have a quorum. And moving on to item number 20, is there any public comment at this point in time? Seeing none. On to item number 21, approval of the minutes of May 18th. Has everyone had a chance to read those?
I move to approve the minutes of the Carson City Redevelopment Authority for May 18th, 2017 as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. On to item number 22. Lee, will you take us through this?
Good morning. Lee Plemmel, Community Development Director. This is an item for possible action to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors regarding the expenditure of up to $16,000 to support the Arlington Square Event Plaza. This is an application from the Downtown Business Association to create an event plaza on the Arlington Plaza on the west side, in the parking lot across the street from the Nugget. And I want to start out by saying Dean DeLula with the Nugget wanted to be here, and I apologize for the miscommunication with him. He thought the meeting was later in the day, but we do have the applicant here, Jennifer Smith from the Nugget and Mike Riggs from the Downtown Business Association. So, but I just wanted to note that real quick. This application, so this was a little bit of an unusual one, and I think the RAC struggled with it a little bit in terms of categorizing it, because typically special event applications are for a one-time event, for some specific event. They get the money to put on the event. In trying to categorize that, we brought it forward because this is a temporary event plaza to facilitate multiple events this season, and to have some of the equipment to be able to facilitate it ongoing into future years as well. In the packet, you have the application showing the basic layout. It's a similar layout to what they've set up in the past, to have a stage set up that could be used by various different community organizations and events throughout the year, with the tents going around there for various vendors. Again, the applicant's here to kind of answer more questions about that. The Redevelopment Authority reviewed it on June 5th, at their meeting earlier this month. And they recommended, so the request is for $16,000. Their recommendation is to fund $5,000. So there was a lot of discussion of that. One of the primary things being, a couple things. One of them being that the $16,000 is all that's remaining in the special event fund, and kind of as a policy, they kind of wanted to keep a little bit available in case some other events came up before the end of the fiscal year in June of 2018. And a little bit about uncertainty of the application and the specific events and what I think the phrase was used, bang for the buck, is going to be, not knowing exactly what events are going to be. So the recommendation, after actually quite a bit of discussion, I think they talked about it almost an hour and a half, was the only item on the agenda. But the recommendation is to fund $5,000 for the event this year. Mr. DeLulo was there with the Nugget representing the application in that case, and acknowledged that he would be willing to take whatever redevelopment was willing to offer and make the best of whatever he could. They plan on matching with their own funds as well to implement it, and as indicated in the budget. So I'll conclude with that. That's an overview of it. Again, the applicant's here to answer any specific questions, and thank you.
Are there any board questions? Brad?
I do have a question, Lee. You may not know this, and the applicant may have to come up, but I was just wondering if any improvements to the site were going to be done before the venue set up. So previously, there's a lot of sand that's blown in there. There's some cracks in the asphalt. There's weeds growing. Just wondering if there's any plans to clean that up before we use it as a venue.
Yeah, they may be able to answer that. I know the Nugget has been systematically going around their properties. The Nugget Adams Foundation has systematically been going around their properties, cleaning up parking lots and weeds in the cracks. As we know, we've had a banner year for weeds.
I have a question as well, and I'm not sure, and maybe the applicant has to answer this, and that is, if we should approve this today, how will you coordinate with other existing events going on so that there's no conflicts?
Thank you for hearing us today. I'm Derek Sheldon with the Carson Nugget. I'm the Director of Systems. I have Mike Riggs with the DBA, and unfortunately there's a little bit of a scheduling confusion. So Dean is actually out of town on a family vacation. He's planning on being back this afternoon. So for the scheduling conflicts, we're going to be working together with the DBA as well as our marketing team, making sure that we can get the best potential out of the location. The big goal is trying to get events and energy back downtown, so that way we can bring a little more life downtown. We have, as an example, we worked with a local car club this past weekend, and we donated the Arlington Event Center to them for their fundraiser for the Food for Thought. So that's kind of the thought process, to work together with the teams to make sure that we can get the energy and the best events back downtown.
Mike, did you want to say something?
Yes, Mike Riggs with the Downtown Business Association. My understanding is that the Nugget will control the scheduling. Ideally, the thought process is we're not here to conflict with the other events going down, because in town already, I mean, you know, McFadden Plaza and the BAC are doing great jobs. But there's still some more opportunity to drive business downtown. The Nugget parking lot being donated to all of us in our community is just another opportunity. The DBA looks at it for our benefit is, when we do our monthly wine walk, as the nice summer months are, it'd be a great opportunity for us to do our after party there in the plaza. Not so much doing it in the Nugget as we do most of the time. So we get a little bit of opportunity to get people out moving around and whatnot there. The other thing we're looking at is hosting our first international chili cook-off in August. So ideally, we would like to utilize the square versus closing Telegraph Street and Curry Street in order to put on an event like that. So my understanding with my conversations with Dean was to make this an opportunity for the other nonprofit organizations in our community and just to drive business downtown, help our nonprofits with a venue that is already in place so they don't have to worry about those logistics and things of that nature. Like I said, the DBA will not be controlling the schedule, but we would like to be the voice, get the word out, you know, to the businesses in the community in support of this. And that the Nugget will be the master scheduler on that. Now, I know that Dean has talked with Joel and looking at what's going on there, and it sounds like, you know, we should be able to work this out. This is something new. Obviously, it's a, you know, it's a risk in a sense. We're not quite sure how it's going to go, but I think in the long run, the longevity, it'll pick up and it'll provide some more opportunity for our businesses downtown.
Thank you, Mike. And back to Brad's previous question, will any site improvements be done on that Arlington Square parking lot?
I'm not sure of all the specifics of the improvements in which we are currently undergoing. Right now, Dean and Steve are working together to do the improvements at all their parking lots. We have just actually finished resealing and striping lots 1, 2, and I think 3, which are the ones just to the east of the parking lot. And I know Steve has in plan to be going through and doing similar on the other parking lots. So I'm not 100% sure of all the details of what they're doing, but I know they are going through and revamping and cleaning up and giving a facelift to all of the property.
Yes, I want to follow up on that because they're doing the ones to the east, but Brad's question was actually about the one to the west, which is the one you want to use. You say you don't know if that's going to be done before this gets underway, and obviously we're into the season.
I know it's on the hit list to be done. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing to each one of the lots individually, because I've heard discussions of repaving, I've heard discussions of putting in updated lighting and that sort of deal. So I'm not, I don't have all the specifics as to what Dean and Steve have talked about, but I know that there is talk about doing all the lots and all the properties and giving them facelifts.
I'm on RAC, and I recall you were at the first session, and so were you, Mike, and then Dean was at the next one last 10 days ago. And I'm curious as to whether any more progress has been made to find events besides the cook-off and the wine walk, et cetera, because that was one of the concerns on RAC that was voiced. There wasn't a list of potential events. So I was curious as to whether anything had been done about that at this juncture.
I still don't have a list of the events and the specifics as to what's going to be coming into place. We have talked to the DBA about their 3 different events that they have going on. We're wanting to redo the Roads of the Future. Last year when the foundation and the Nugget undertook the Roads of the Future, they footed the $15,000 for that one-day event. So they're wanting to basically take that Road to the Future thought process, make it bigger, make that energy come back. So we don't have the exact events that we have going on, minus the few that have already been kind of hashed out, including redoing the Road to the Future, the DBA's International Chili Cook-Off, kind of the after parties, getting the energy back outside. So I don't have a list of everything that we're going to be doing because we don't have the details as to the exact layout yet, so it's hard to get people to commit to something that's kind of penciled in right now. I know we have talked with a number of locations. Once again, I don't have that list in front of me, but the thought process is there, and we do have, I think it's 8 events that are currently planned for that time period, so we are in the process of building those up.
Another question is, one of the things that came up during the RAC meeting was that this is actually buying some items. Now, Dean was there. I'm sorry he's not here because I did want to ask more about that. He said that perhaps if that was a stopping point that you'd rent them. I know money's fungible, and of course you could use money once you get it for whatever, but I think that is part of the thought that RAC had when they decided, we decided as a group to say, no, we're not going to go the whole 16, not only because of what Lee said, which is that we want to keep some in the kitty, but for possible future things, but also because we didn't want money to go to buy something that then would be in the private sector. And the question I actually really wanted to ask Dean, and perhaps you know or you don't know, is he indicated that the private sector would step up, as Lee said, and he said that the Nugget would be part of that. Do you know if Steve Neighbors also is intending to kick in some for this? It's on his actual property.
So Steve Neighbors and the Adams Trust is also going to be participating in this. Like I previously stated, we are looking at doing kind of like the Road to the Future thought process, where Steve threw in some money, the Nugget threw in some money. With the concern of assets, Dean has gone out and we've started a plan of attack for rentals, so that way we don't have that concern of assets and where assets are going to be lying after the event is over. The rental costs are more expensive than if we had purchased tents and that sort of deal. So the plan of attack is to rent the tents, rent everything. I believe it's through Camelot. So that way we can nix that fear of assets that RAC had. So we are going to be looking at doing rentals through the course of the event's timeline with the kickoff of the from the start of the DBA chili cook-off through Nevada Day. So
let me clarify this. So now you're saying that you're going to change the application into rentals instead of purchasing the assets, which could be used for years to come, and then you'd be back looking for rentals again. So I don't know that, I'm not going to say I object to the purchase of the items because I think it's more cost effective, and the RAC and the Nugget and the whole community would then have the opportunity to reuse those items for more events. So I don't see any need to condition that you have to rent the equipment versus purchase it. But one of the thoughts I was having is I'm remembering back to an application that we had years ago that dealt with an infrastructure purchase, which was the track for the roller derby, and that turned out to be very successful because we put a condition on it that said you have to bring 3 events in the redevelopment area to be able to partake of the money. And then at least we felt comfortable with that infrastructure purchase. So I'm wondering if this would make us comfortable to say, you've got one, potentially the chili feed, but you have to bring me 2 more new ones and then purchase the infrastructure, but that we get 3 signature events in that new Arlington Plaza area. So what do you think of that idea? You'd have all year to get it done and do 3 events, just to say buy the infrastructure, but I want to see 3 events so we get the money's worth.
Yes, that's the right thing to do. Right now we've got 2 events scheduled. It would be the back to the Road to the Future, which is the day before Nevada Day. The chili cook-off, which is August the 19th. So we've already got 2 there. I think that's very, very fair. And in fact, the last thing we want to do is to rent, because renting is like 4 times the cost. And then you're right, then it's not going to be utilized for anything else. And now we have some assets to be able to draw from, whether it's in Arlington or not. So I believe that we could probably find a 3rd one, and I think that's a very fair stipulation. If we're asking for some support on this from the redevelopment, then there should be some strings attached like that. I'm in favor of that.
John?
Yeah, I just want to mention again that the RAC's concern was that we didn't want to purchase equipment with city money that wound up in the private hands. The roller derby precedent notwithstanding. So that's when Dean volunteered that, well, we could rent it. I don't think anybody's urging that he rent it. We were just trying to make sure that the public dollars didn't go for that. As I've said, money is fungible, but I think that's part of the reason maybe that the the 16 was scaled back, because we toted up the cost of the hard items, the stage and the tents, et cetera, and it came to almost $20,000. So that would overlap from the 16 the private sector said it was going to put up to the end of the 16. So that's a good idea to go to 3, but I still, the city wouldn't have access to it. Does it have access to the roller derby track?
No, but I want to say one of the neatest things, I just saw that they had the most banner year they've had with participation and winners, and they were able to bring in a bigger audience. And so I happened to be at the park when they were doing something. So I think that the asset paid off. And I think what I'm looking for, John, is if we invest in something, I want the long-term derivative value of that.
Well, I agree.
Versus one time they rent something, we get no future value from it.
I agree.
And I don't want the project to come back the next year. One of the things in RAC, and I think at the redevelopment, that we're striving for is to reduce the reliance on us. So if we can fund something and be, I want a one and done, I'm much more in favor of saying I'm going to invest in it because he's going to match it. Like you said, they're bringing in $16,000 of their own dollars. I just would prefer to allow them to purchase it. I don't want to put the condition. But I do want the condition that you have to bring me 3 events.
Well, and secondarily, I think that there was a problem with the idea of purchasing it when they are stepping up with more, and Dean even said that the private sector probably would come up with more. So I agree with you that it's a good value in that sense, but in the sense that the city, when it purchases something with tax dollars, or even if they're redevelopment, business tax dollars, should have control or oversight or additional use. That would be my preference. But I don't think we need to put that in as a condition if we do the 5,000. I'm just voicing what happened at RAC and what people seem to be thinking.
Lee, yes.
I'd just like to add on to this discussion, and Supervisor Bag, a little bit of more history on this infrastructure purchase for John, and maybe Lori can, Supervisor Bagwell can correct me if I'm wrong, but going back a little bit of a history, part of the barrier to purchases in the past has been the management, who's going to manage the asset, and the city's inability to do it. And we've actually, RAC in the past has talked a lot about finding the private side that is willing to take it on to manage these assets. So there's a little bit of both. It's good that the city has access to it, but then the city needs to have the capacity to store it somewhere, take it in and out every time somebody wants to use it and manage it, and that's been a problem in the past. So this, in some way, solves that issue.
Well, I'm sure you recall the Reimagine project that was brought before the RAC recently, and the City Visitors Bureau is going to manage that, but they are connected to the city. And I just want to state for the record, my druthers are that we not use public money for private purchases, ever.
And my first question is, if we don't approve any funding today, is this project still going to move forward?
I know Dean and Steve have talked about still wanting to do events in that area. Without the funding, it might be smaller than the hope to bring the energy back downtown through a big chunk of the summer. But I know Steve and Dean have both talked about wanting to get the energy back downtown. So I believe that they're still planning on doing something downtown to some extent.
Okay, and then addressing Lori and John's comments about purchase of assets, I agree with John that if there's going to be an asset purchase, which I think there should be, that the city's going to want some control over that. In this case, that's probably not going to happen. But when you look at the breakdown of costs, there's $3,000 for porta potties and hand washing stations, which benefits the public. There's $2,500 for the setup of the facility. There's $3,000 for the storage unit to hold the tables and chairs. So that's a total of $8,500 in expenses that exclude any purchase of assets. So considering the amount that we could theoretically approve, somewhere up to $8,500, then that isn't even an issue for me.
Brad, you've just articulated the reason I was able to vote at 5,000. Exactly.
Any other, Bob?
Do you have the rental charges? If you say a charity can use it, what are the costs to the charity for using the facility?
So the goals, and which we kind of talked about previously, is that there is no setup cost to these charities. Like the ice rink that the Nugget donates the Arlington Square to over the winter, like the car show that went on over the past weekend, there is no setup fees for these people. They have to cover their own operational costs of whatever they're needing to cover to do their event, but the setup costs are already taken care of. The event center is already there, so that way they have the ability to utilize it.
Okay, so essentially, I mean, I know the car show, the Revival Car Show, paid for the use of the parking lot with the Nugget. Is that gonna still happen with charities after this happens?
The goal is that there is no setup costs. I'm not sure what fees that they paid for. From my understanding, the lot itself was donated to them for them to be able to put on the Food for Thoughts fundraiser.
The application shows revenue, 60,000. I assume that comes from, where's that come from?
Some of the revenues, like on the Road to the Future and the Nevada Day, because they kind of piggybacked to each other last year, was we had set up a little mini beer garden out there, so there are revenues that get generated from that sort of events. Last year with, oh shit, I'm totally spacing the charity now. But on Road to the Future, there's a charity that ran the beer garden on that Friday, and so they had revenues generated from their beer sales on that particular day. We had donated the parking lot, we had given them the tents and the beer cart, and they basically brought in the revenue from the beer sales to be able to fund for domestic violence. It was advocates. Thank you.
So do I understand what you're saying is that the Nugget got nothing? They just gave the parking lot away and there was no, except for setup costs?
That is correct. Last year for the Road to the Future, between the Nugget and the Adams Trusts, they had come out of pocket for the $15,000 for that setup, and they had donated it to get that energy downtown to have that groundbreaking for the new street, and so it was completely out of pocket between the Nugget and a heavy chunk of it from Steve Neighbors.
And you, of course, the dean's not here again, but wouldn't object to that of being a condition of this, that there be no charges other than setup costs to those who are charitable that come in?
I don't want to put words in Dean's mouths, but that is what he was talking about this morning. I was actually talking to him on our way over here. That part of this is the fact that we're covering the setup costs, getting the energy back downtown, so that way they just have the operational costs that they have to cover. That's what we were talking about earlier.
Bob, did you need to finish a thought?
No, I think where I am, I have questions, but given the amount of money and what I just heard from Supervisor Bankowski, I think, that logic is persuasive to me, so, all right.
Thank you, Mayor Kroll.
And my comment is that this money is intended to be seed money, so I do agree with the thought process that the RAC went through to arrive at their decision. I think it's a good partnership with regards to that, but since it has no track record yet, it definitely, seed money is the way to go.
Karen, I'd just like to piggyback on that, because when I asked that question during RAC of Dean, he seemed to he said he hoped it would grow. He didn't, and he wasn't evading the question. He just said he hoped it would grow and that he could come back. But I think that's another part of the stipulation we need to make clear, that this is seed money. This isn't come back every year and see if you can get more.
Is there any other board comment or questions?
Just one comment, going back to my original thought. Instead of just giving a arbitrary amount of money, I would like to kind of put a tag on it. And again, I go back to the porta potties and hand washing stations at $3,000 and then $2,500 for the initial labor to set it up. I would be agreeable to funding those 3 items in the amount of $5,500.
And the stipulation of 3 events, because I don't want, okay, I can live with that.
All right. Is there any public comment on this? Seeing none, thank you, and I'm going to bring this back to the board for a motion.
I move to approve and recommend that the Board of Supervisors authorize the expenditure of $5,500 from the fiscal year 2018 redevelopment revolving fund to support the Arlington Square Event Plaza in support of the redevelopment district as an expense incidental to the carrying out of the redevelopment plan that has been adopted by the Carson City Board of Supervisors, and based upon the findings that there is a causal connection between this redevelopment effort and the need for the expenses. The expenses are needed to ensure the success of the redevelopment plan, and that the amount of the expenses to be given are minor in comparison to the money required for the overall redevelopment plan, with the condition that a minimum of 3 events are scheduled for this season.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Just that we don't need to put it in this, but amongst ourselves, I think we understand that this is a one-time thing for seed money. We don't need to put it in the motion, I don't think.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? On to item number 23, additional public comment. Is there any other public comment pertaining to redevelopment? Seeing none, moving on to item 24, possible action to adjourn the redevelopment authority.
Move adjourn.
All right. All right, so moved. Then I will turn the gavel over to the mayor, and we will reconvene as the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, we're going to reconvene as the Board of Supervisors. We'll take up item number 26 alpha. This is a companion item to what we just discussed with the Redevelopment Authority. This is to adopt a resolution authorizing the expenditure of certain funds from the Redevelopment Revolving Fund. In consideration of this, we will incorporate by reference all the discussion and motion of the redevelopment authority that we just had. Anything further to come before us other than what we've already heard? Any public comments, anybody? Okay, motion's in order.
This is resolution number 22. I move to adopt resolution number 2017-R22, authorizing the expenditure of $5,500 from the fiscal year 2018 redevelopment revolving fund of the Redevelopment Authority to support the Arlington Square Events Plaza as an expense incidental to the carrying out of the redevelopment plan, with a correction to the actual posted resolution, which still shows an amount of $16,000.
There's a motion and a second. On the motion, discussion. Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Carried unanimous. Okay, let's take up 26 Bravo. This is introduced on first reading ordinance to amend the zoning map regarding a resolution of intent affecting property zone neighborhood business at 806 Randall Drive. I think that's Randall or Randall? Randall Drive. Okay. Who's going to take this? Oh, disclosures are in order. Sorry.
NRS 281A.420 requires me to disclose a conflict of interest and abstain from participating when I have a disqualifying conflict. Although I do not have an ongoing business relationship with Nevada Builders Alliance, my 2 partners in my real estate brokerage do. Because of this substantial and continuing relationship, the independence of judgment of a reasonable person in my position would be affected by this private commitment. Therefore, I will not be participating on this matter.
Any other disclosures? I don't see any. Okay, who's going to do it? Hope?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hope Sullivan, Planning Manager. First, for the benefit of the board, I'll mention that each of your seats, you should have found this late material. This late material is actually the attachments to the Planning Commission report. So you received a copy of the Planning Commission report, but you didn't receive the attachments. So I wanted you to have these, and I will speak to them in a little bit.
You want to put the Planning Commission report on the record or summarize it at some point in time during the presentation?
I will do that. In terms of context, and I do have a slide up for you, the property is located at 806 Randall Drive and was constructed as an office and has been used as an office since it was constructed in 2002. The zoning to the west is neighborhood business, and the land use is a post office. Specifically, it's the back of house parking lot of the post office. Zoning to the north, the east, and the south is mobile home 6,000, with single-family homes to the north and to the east, and single-family and multifamily residential to the south. By way of background, at its meeting on June 21st, the board, 21st, 2001, sorry. I was about to tell you you did something on June 21. Okay, at its meeting June 21st, 2001, the Board of Supervisors amended the zoning map, designating the subject property as neighborhood business. So you might wonder why this is before you. Because the board also adopted what's called a resolution of intent. In terms of content, the resolution of intent limited the use to an office for the Builders Association of Western Nevada. It included wording that if the property were sold, it would need to be rezoned back to mobile home 6,000. It limited the structure to a single story in height. It specified landscaping along the eastern and northern property lines, and it identified signage specifications. So I'm just going to go back to basics for a minute. When we talk about zoning, we talk about two things. How can you use your land? And what's the dimensional criteria? How tall can a building be? What are your setbacks and the like? When you have supplemental regulations above and beyond your base zoning, it's usually done through a planned unit development, and you saw that with Vintage. Remember, we put the P on the map, so that meant we had another book of rules we had to apply. A resolution of intent is a really unusual instrument. The code doesn't call out the resolution of intent, it calls out the planned unit development, or the PD. So should this resolution of intent be rescinded, the neighborhood business zoning that we see on the map today would continue to be what's on the map today, but the uses allowed there would be subject to the uses in the code for neighborhood business, and the dimensional criteria would be the same, so in terms of that restriction on one story and so on in the resolution of intent. And there would not be supplemental regulations.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure. I was going to ask that too.
What's the legal basis for a resolution of intent? I mean, where does that come from? I didn't mean to catch you by surprise.
No, that's okay. And I'm sorry, what was the question?
What's the legal basis for a resolution of intent? I mean, and what's the legal significance of that? I mean, if I caught you by surprise, I apologize.
And I mean, my guess is as good as yours in that it acts as kind of like an MOU, and it's a layer to what is already standing with regard to zoning.
In layman's terms, it's a supplemental regulation. So I think if you think about your zoning as a base layer of regulations, the resolution of intent is an instrument that creates a secondary layer on top of that layer, similar to the planned unit development.
Let me give a shot to.
Yeah, well,
so I think there is no.
Is a resolution of intent, is there a code section that talks about that?
No, it's not addressed in the code, so that's why I explained that now, if we read our code, I think it's 1709, talks about the planned unit development. Right now in our municipal code, we don't have an instrument called a resolution of intent.
Did we ever? Well, okay, I mean, I guess, the question is.
I think that's.
Let me just digest that a little bit. Supervisor Abel's got a question too.
Something that you said bothers me a little bit. I know what the proposed use is, but it kind of sounds like this could be anything in terms of any sort of business if with currently what we have in front of us.
Actually, that's what I'm about to speak specifically to, which is why I was troubled you hadn't received those attachments to the Planning Commission report, and I wanted to make sure you saw that, so you saw exactly what the Planning Commission saw in terms of the scope of allowable uses and the process to establish those uses. So if the mayor's good, I'll keep going.
While you're there on that Planning Commission, this particular agenda item hasn't been to the Planning Commission. It has? All right.
Yes, sir.
And I mean, I understood it was a little bit, when I read the report, it was different than that, but what was their recommendation on this?
They recommended by a vote of 3-1, 2 absent, to recommend approval of the zoning map amendment to rescind the resolution of intent.
Okay, and you're going to tell us why they got there?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so when you consider amending the zoning map, you have to make 3 findings of fact. The Planning Commission focused on those findings, and the findings are, just for the benefit of the board, the amendment has to be in compliance with the goals, policies, and action programs of the master plan. The amendment will provide for land uses compatible with existing adjacent land uses and will not have a detrimental impact to other properties in the vicinity. And third, it will not negatively impact existing or planned public services and facilities. So at its meeting of May 24, 2017, the Planning Commission did conduct a public hearing on the subject request. If you look at the late material, which again was an attachment to the Planning Commission meeting, you'll see that I included for them the applicable sections of 1804, which clearly states every single use that could potentially be there and whether or not it's an allowed use, an accessory use, or a special use. You might be wondering why I start with residential office and then go to general office. Well, if you look at page 16 of 1804, you see neighborhood business at the bottom. Neighborhood business tells us that the uses in general office are allowed in neighborhood business, so we have to include the uses in general office. When we're in general office, it tells us we have to include where the uses identified in residential office are allowed in general office, so we have to include residential office. But residential office doesn't direct us anywhere, so we can stop. so the uses identified in chapter 1804 for those 3 zoning districts are the scope of uses that could be allowed should the supplemental regulations be removed. The Planning Commission looked at this. They considered the size of the lot. They considered the configuration of the lot. They considered the reality of being able to accommodate parking on this site and felt the parking would be a limiting factor in any use establishing there. They also, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So they did definitely consider the scope. They also considered what was an allowable use versus what was a special use or a conditional use. A conditional use will require a special use permit. So you receive correspondence from the Brashers, and they identified various uses they felt would be in conflict with their home. But when the Planning Commission considers a special use permit, they have 7 findings of fact. And one of those findings of fact is the compatibility with adjacent uses and whether it's going to be harmful to the peaceful enjoyment of land. And so the Planning Commission, because they work with special use permits and the findings associated with special use permits so frequently, were able to sort of recognize, well, these conditional uses will need to come to us, and we're going to have the right to determine whether we can make findings. These aren't just allowable. So although on paper they may look like that wouldn't work, when it got here, if it's not going to work, we're going to say it's not going to work, and you can't have a special use permit. So hopefully that helps explain a little bit of the Planning Commission's thinking. So they did vote, again, 3-1 with 2 absent to recommend to the board.
If that's the case, tell me what the rationale is for this application.
The resolution of intent creates the second layer of regulations. Very specifically, when the Planning Commission heard this, and I'm going to get to answering your question in 1 second, the Planning Commission actually had 3 applications before them. One was an amendment to the zoning map to rescind the resolution of intent. The second was a special use permit for a child care facility. And the applicant wanted that agendized at the same meeting because they wanted to be very transparent on what their intent was. And third, they were seeking a variance on the parking. They have appealed the decision of the Planning Commission concerning the special use permit and the variance, and that will be agendized for you at your meeting of the 15th? No, your next meeting. So
who, tell me again, who appealed that and what's that all about now?
the applicant has appealed the Planning Commission's decision to deny the special use permit.
And the special use permit would have permitted what again?
The request was for a child care facility.
Okay.
So that will be before you as an appeal at your next meeting.
And a child care facility is a conditional use?
Correct.
In a neighborhood business?
Correct. So so I did want to point out that the Planning Commission did have that scope of, a larger scope of review. You'll ultimately have that entire scope, but right now your scope of review is just the amendment to the zoning map. The city manager did ask me, he said, why are we looking at this and not looking at the whole package? And in my opinion, there is a benefit to looking at the zoning in isolation and making a decision. When I spoke to the Planning Commission, I think the word I used was awkward. A resolution of intent is an awkward instrument. And right now, not only do we have a limitation on use, i.e. a limitation to an office, we have a limitation on who can use that office. The Nevada Builders Association of Western Nevada. What if they were to change? What if they were to incorporate as a different entity and that entity no longer existed? I just find the instrument and the substance of the instrument to be awkward. And I personally think as a professional planner, think there's merit to eliminating that instrument. And I did recommend approval of the zoning map, and we're using zoning map as the procedural process to get there because it was created through a zoning map amendment.
Regardless, and we got other questions going on here. Regardless of the legal effect of a resolution of intent, it really does speak to what they thought was going to go on that piece of property. Is that right or wrong?
No, you're exactly right. It's very similar to a PD, and you all recently had a PD where you did limit the use over at Vintage, and I think if in 20 years someone came forward and said, well, we want different uses, that wasn't your intent when you took your vote. So you're absolutely right, Mayor.
And with that in mind, what's the rationale then for opening the door up even further than it would be? If you assume that that's what, in 2001, that's what the board was looking at, and that's what those homes were built around there for, with that in mind, what's the rationale then of changing at least the intent of what they thought was going to go in there? Put aside whether or not it's, because the zoning ordinance allows a greater degree of uses, conditional or otherwise, than what the board clearly had in mind in 2001. What's the theory of why the Planning Commission said, on just the zoning issue, what's the theory of saying, well, that was the intent back then, but we don't need that now? What's the theory on that? The theory is, I guess you're going back to saying that the Builders Association is named in the resolution of intent. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Put words in your mouth. I didn't mean to. Okay.
No, you put words in the Planning Commission's mouth. Just kidding. Actually, you just spoke pretty closely to what the chair of the Planning Commission, who voted no on this, he kept saying, I want to understand why we did this. I want to understand why we did this. He kept saying that in the meeting. Okay, to one answer and one comment. The Planning Commission focused on the findings of fact, the 3 findings of fact. Let's pretend we have a blank slate. Does neighborhood business zoning, is that appropriate at this site? And is it in compliance with the goals, policies, and actions of the master plan? It's been there. It's been there since 2001.
It's been there, but it's been there under a different
limitation.
A limitation.
Correct.
So I think that, when you talk about one, and I'm just trying to figure out in my own mind where this is going. In terms of, because I get what's going, I think I get, in general terms, what's happening here. But I'm trying to figure out, because I guess, if the neighbors out there think that they're going to have something that looks like a house next to them, and then you turn that into something different under a neighborhood business, I'm wondering how, what's the theory of doing that? What's the public interest in it? I get the Builders Association, I know they're caught in a bind here, but what's the theory of it?
Two things. One, I think the Planning Commission, as you mentioned, thought it was a positive thing to get rid of the resolution of intent because it is an awkward instrument. And I think they did focus on the 3 findings, and they were a majority of them, 3 of them found in the affirmative. Having said that, what I hear you saying is, well, a resolution of intent may be an awkward instrument, but can't we get to a place where we're apples to apples as opposed to opening the door? And Aaron West and I had that conversation fairly recently, since the application came in. We didn't explore it thoroughly in advance of the application coming in. Now, something we could consider, and Aaron West is present, is whether or not we go back to the drawing board a little bit and come back with a plan with a neighborhood business P, where we do give you the opportunity to limit the uses if you feel like that's what would be necessary to make the findings. And that way, it's a little more akin to what's in place right now.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you guys are talking about that. What? Hang on a second, Aaron, we'll get you, don't worry, I know you're there. I know you're there. Wait till we get these guys going here, then we can have comments, and I'll shut up.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're gonna talk to Aaron and you about what these things mean. I mean, what you're potentially discussing. I have one last question for you. Could this board remove the resolution of intent without approving, without permitting any conditional uses on the property that are existing under our ordinance?
No, if you remove the resolution of intent, then there would be no second layer of regulation, and so the base layer of regulation would apply. So unless the only instrument available to you in the code to limit uses would be the planned unit development.
You might be able to do that something under a neighborhood business P or whatever you called it.
Correct. Under the planned unit development, you can supplement the regulations, so you can supplement the allowable uses like you did on Vintage, and you limited the use in that neighborhood business to a single use, and you could limit dimensional criteria as well.
All right, we got a bunch of lights up here, and we'll give everybody a chance to talk, don't worry. Okay, Karen, then we'll go this way.
That thought process appeals to me more, simply because I am concerned about what we open the door to in terms of usages in that neighborhood and its effect on property values and so forth. So I am anxious to hear a little bit more about what you're proposing.
Right, and if that's where a majority of the supervisors are, I would recommend that you, if the applicant's receptive to this, that we go back to Planning Commission with the request to a planned unit development with a limitation, and then we get back here with a restricted neighborhood business.
So it would be a planned unit development on one parcel of property?
It's what you just did on Vintage.
But it would apply to what? What would the guideline? What would be the geographical structure of the P?
You actually, if you look at the zoning map, you have planned unit development to the south of that property. The townhouses are also a P, and I think this P would be very specific to this parcel. But this parcel's an oddball. It's weird. There's a resolution of intent only associated with this parcel. So if the objective is to continue to have limitations, perhaps different limitations, but limitations nonetheless, and not have just the base zoning, the instrument to get there is the planned unit development.
All right, I'm just curious. Okay, Lori, and then Brad, then John. Sorry.
Mayor, I just want to make you. I just want to make sure that you're conscientious of what the agenda title actually says. So it gives you a choice of just amending by lifting the resolution or not. So you're kind of tied to that action. So the agenda says that you are, you're introducing on first reading an ordinance to amend the zoning map by rescinding a resolution of intent affecting that property. So that is what was agendized, that's what the public thinks
So
you want
then
to
if we
do.
want to move forward, and I don't, far be it from me to read 5 of us up here at the board. But what you're saying then is that if we're going to do something, then we need to, or if there's some other agreement, we need to just table this and let them come back.
If that's what you want to do, so either you rescind the resolution, or you decide that you're not going to rescind the resolution, and you can bring it back for some other action. But the action today before you is to.
Right. Okay, we'll just make sure we're on track with the open meeting law. It's all right.
No, that is true, that you could refer it back. You could refer it back to the Planning Commission with further instructions.
All right.
You
We
are
can do
allowed
that.
to do that, but if you're going to take action, then you would only be limited to rescinding or not rescinding that.
All right. Lori and then John, we'll go.
Okay. So what I want to get to is a planning issue in and of itself. So for me, I don't believe the resolution is appropriate. It is, if I'm reading this correct, it shall be an office, and it is specific for the Builders Association of Western Nevada. So I think the items that are in the resolution are inappropriate. I don't think you can restrict a piece of property to say that forevermore so-and-so is going to own it and they can't sell it, they can't do anything with their piece of property. So if we get to the first issues first, I do believe the resolution needs to go away. Now, if we were to vote to rescind the resolution, that means it would become an NB, correct? Then it's not like the applicant can come running in to put a conditioned use in NB that wouldn't have to work through a process in the first place. That could be limited, but we do have a process for an NBP, because I can see 2 there. So I really think these are distinct issues, and that the separate action that we're discussing could be handled in the separate action appropriately if the applicant were to come forward with something through the Planning Commission
We'll see where the
anyway.
applicant goes.
Right.
What Darren wants to say.
And
John.
so, anyway.
I'm sorry. Did I cut you? I didn't.
No, that's all
cut you
right.
off.
That's just what I'm saying. I think we need to distinctly deal with each issue appropriately. Thanks.
I wish I could agree with Lori. My problem is that if we rescind this now, we're working in the dark. So I would, for example, like to ask, but think I would probably be called into question regarding that question by our attorney, what it was the staff had recommended on the things that haven't come before us. But since they haven't come before us, I won't ask. But I do think we need to send this back to the Planning Commission and let them take another crack at it, because it is a package. I don't care what the, excuse me for putting it this way, Mr. Mayor, I don't care what the law says. We need to look at the whole thing. And you probably agree with that, even though you do care what the law says.
I agree with the law when it fits my idea. I'm getting pretty good at that. Anyway, I don't mean to be facetious. Aaron, you want to come up and tell us where we are on all this and what your plans are, and we'll see if we can find a way to play Solomon here.
Right on. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. First of all, let me apologize for my casual attire. You
don't have to worry about it. Don't worry about it.
I had.
You look good.
I was under the impression, I think, like some of you, that all of this was coming to you in one bundle, and it was a complete, oversight on my part, the idea that the fact that a zone change has to come to you twice. So I understand the idea of bringing it the first time for this time, and then next time as that full package, for the ultimate approval of the zone change, along with, as John pointed out, what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So this is the 2 times a year I'm wearing my cowboy boots because we're going to be at the Reno Rodeo tonight. So apologize for that. So, and I know with zone change, it gets a little tricky in terms of whether or not, you can talk about uses and conditions and so forth, but maybe I can provide some context. So, as you know, and for the record, Aaron West, the CEO of the Nevada Builders Alliance, I work at the leisure of my board of directors. I am, I don't have a fiduciary interest in this property at all. I work at their steed and try to affect, their wishes. This was an interesting situation for us as well. You guys know that we had an opportunity to join a group, an investment group, and participate in the purchase and remodel of a new office building over at Division Williams. We were very excited about that opportunity, and it made a lot of sense for us. So we're excited to be over there. We had this opportunity with this new office. That part of it has worked out great. That left us with, what do we do with our existing asset that's sitting over there on Randall? And the reality of the situation is that we own it free and clear. There's no debt on it. We're not a motivated seller. And so when we started looking at, okay, if we're going to keep it, which that was the intent of the board, there's no reason to sell, what are we going to do with it? And I will tell you that really there was two conversations that took place on whether or not we were going to keep it or sell it. If we were to sell it, per the resolution, we would have to change the zoning to MH6000, and we would sell it presumably as a home. The challenge being that, and I know most of you have been in the office, it was designed and built to look like a house from the outside, but within the structure, it is not a home. So we don't have full bathrooms in there, and by full bathrooms, I mean we don't have showers. We have 2 bathrooms in there, but none of them have showers or bathtubs. There's no kitchen facilities, and the layout really would require kind of gutting the inside and starting over. And so it became a financial, consideration for us. Do we want to spend $60,000 to convert it to a house that's at the end of the day is probably worth $220,000, $230,000 when we own the asset outright? So we consulted with commercial real estate folks in the area to say, if we are going to hold on to it and continue to use it as a commercial use, what are our best options? We actually initially put it out there as for an office use. Unfortunately, because of its location and the fact that it's low visibility, we really had no interest from an office user, and that's when we were approached by a daycare. We hadn't even contemplated a daycare, honestly, when we started this process. But in looking at it, we've since done, that kind of started the ball rolling on our due diligence. So in doing our research, we found out that out of the 19 daycares currently in the community, there's only one that is currently accepting infants. The other 2 that are even taking any are taking preschool age children. So we have 16 daycares that have waiting lists. So the capacity and is not there. The need is certainly there for daycare. So then that took us to the next step of, okay, so per the resolution of intent, do we rezone the property to MS6000, or do we look at approaching it from the fact that it's already neighborhood business? Do we just look at removing the resolution of intent? The challenge within the code right now is, if we were to go to the MH6000, there's a stipulation in there that the daycare operator actually has to live on site. So that goes back to, it's not a house. It wasn't designed as such, and therefore there's no facilities for the operator to be able to live on site. So in our minds, that eliminated going back to a residential zoning. So that's when we decided on the neighborhood business and just removing the resolution of intent. Now again, we had the conversation. We knew that there was concerns about opening that door to everything that's allowed within the neighborhood business, and that's why we came forward with a comprehensive package of, we want to remove the resolution of intent, but here's our special use permit for what we're wanting to do. And by the way, in the interest of maintaining the character of the property and not doing improvements to the property that then would facilitate other neighborhood business uses down the road, we also asked for the variance in parking. And I look forward to having that comprehensive conversation with you guys about how we feel that we've adequately addressed the parking and loading and unloading at that site. And we've had concurrence, and we had a great conversation at the Planning Commission about that. And just to be clear, just because it was put on the record that the Planning Commission denied the application, I just want to clarify, there was actually a motion to deny the application, and it failed for lack of a second. There was a motion to approve, which was seconded, but it was a 2-2 vote. So there was only 4 Planning Commission members. So unfortunately, it died due to a tie. Reading the tea leaves, I think the intent was approve the zone change, approve the SUP, and move this thing down the process. So, but I don't want to speak on their behalf. I just wanted to get that on the record.
So you think that the Planning Commission was okay with the child care facility in that?
I honestly, well, judging by the look on the chair's face when it was 2-2, because actually everybody in the room thought it went 3-1, and then all of a sudden it was no. Somebody piped up and said, no, I voted no. So all of a sudden it was a 2-2, and then everybody was looking at each other going, what did we just do? So I think the intent was to move it forward, but I don't want to speak for them. At the end of the day, we're very aware of the potential issues, and to Hope's comments, I think the idea that of the uses that we've heard the most concern about, we feel that we would be adequately insulated because they would have to go through a special use permit process. They would have to go through an additional layer of scrutiny in order to be considered. But at the same time, I can appreciate the neighbors' concerns. I feel that. And unfortunately, there were some things that we were still working out in terms of some mitigating measures as it relates to the daycare with our neighbor. And I will tell you that we have, and she's here today, and I look forward to her getting on the record. We've had great conversations with her, and subsequent to the Planning Commission, where we are really looking at how can we be a good neighbor? How can we, put some mitigating measures in place to try and lessen the impact on them? And I think that we've actually come to some consensus on how that would work for a daycare use. I understand that their bigger issue is if I step out of this building and get hit by a truck and I'm no longer, you're kind of taking me at my word, which hopefully means something, that this is our intent. We plan to hold on to the building, for all intents and purposes. We think we can work very diligently to have a daycare facility there and still maintain some peace within the community or within the neighborhood. So I truly understand that. It really came down to the residential versus the commercial. We couldn't put the operator in there, so we had to go the commercial route. To your point, actually, there's even a provision in NRS that says that you can't condition a zone change. It's a yes or a no. So the idea that this resolution was put intent, we didn't want to, we didn't want to open that can of worms. We didn't want to question the legality of it. We just thought, let's be upfront. Let's go through the process. Let's have the conversation and see where we get. So,
I guess at the end of the day, Aaron, at least from my perspective, the area has been built up around, the Builders Association use, and I've never heard that you're a bad neighbor. I'm a good neighbor. We've been in there a lot, but it does seem if there's a way where we can zone or make a zoning decision that gives the relief to you guys that says, this resolution of intent is really not a legal thing, but at the same time give some certainty or give some certainty to the neighbors that they're not going to be having a property that's going to go hog wild as a commercial use right next to them. I mean, I get that, and I understand. If I were living next to them, I'd kind of think the same way. So, if there's a way where that can be done under, at least from my perspective, it kind of helps you and helps the neighbors. Help you deal with the property and helps the neighbors. If that's done under a PUD or some form of that, that certainly helps. And I don't know if you're willing to go down that road or not, but
for the record, Aaron West, interesting to your point, literally based on a conversation I had with our immediate neighbor, Ms. Basher, this morning, really, I began to see from their perspective, why they're concerned. And to the extent that 20 years down the road, when I may no longer be with the organization and they decide they want to sell it, that opens the door for those folks. And so I agree. I literally reached out to staff to say, if there's a resolution of intent, whether we agree with it or not, it's there. Is it worth modifying it, or do we, look at just removing? And so Hope pointed out to me that there is a process, and it's the first time it's come up. But
I think what you're seeing, and board members can weigh in, is that none of us up here are happy or comfortable with the resolution of intent. We don't know what it means, but it definitely has some degree of meaning in terms of what people were thinking back then, and in terms of what it should mean going forward, whether or not it's the right legal way they did it, which is questionable. Let's put it like that. So
yeah, and just back to your question, I'm not opposed to the process. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with timeframes or costs associated with it. So but I'm certainly happy to. I think at this stage, it's probably in everyone's best interest.
Okay, all right, John. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Aaron. I think you've provided me one of the highlights of my time in Nevada. First time I've ever heard anybody apologize for coming in cowboy boots here. And perhaps you could answer the question I can't ask staff. I don't know if I'm getting outside the parameters, but do you recall what the staff recommendation was? You already told us it was a 2-2 vote. Right. Did they?
Based on the findings, with most staff recommendations, it was if you can meet the findings, then we recommend approval. And if you can't, then you can't. But,
I thought that would be the case.
Yeah. At the end of the day, and unfortunately, the variance. Then once the special use permit kind of failed surprisingly, then the variance they almost didn't take an action on it. And we actually we requested that they take an action on it, even if it was denial, just so that we had a recourse.
Am I getting any sense out of what you're saying, that you're thinking of going back to your board and saying, what else can we do, or are you still planning to go forward with the idea of a daycare center?
I would tell you that at the end of the day, I still think the highest and best use for that property, and in terms of where we're at in the community right now and what the community needs, I really think that the daycare is a perfect use there. And so and I believe that we've worked very closely with our direct neighbor, who would have the largest impact from this use, to come up with some mitigating measures in terms of restrictions on hours and use and stuff like that. I think we can do this in such a way that we can be a good neighbor.
Okay. Yeah, the comment that we'll get some public.
So I guess we have a couple of options. I believe we're all in agreement that the particular document's not appropriate. It's not in our planning code. It's not the way we should go. How long, so if the applicant were to have to come and provide, why can't we do everything? My question is, why can't we restrict it all in the special use permit like we do everyone else? I mean, I guess is it to take out uses that wouldn't require a special use permit? Just so the public understands, I think that's what we're trying to get to here, right? Is that uses that would be allowed in neighborhood business without a special use permit is what we're interested in eliminating by putting potentially a PUD restriction? Is that what we're trying to do, is say, normally these are allowed without special use permits, but we're going to say you can't do this, this, and this, and so therefore you need a PUD? And how long does that process take?
Yeah, I think that's what.
Right, I just want the public to understand what we're doing. Right.
Okay.
Right.
Right. I mean, because if it comes back to neighborhood business, I mean, there's a whole lot of uses under there. I think not all of those are something that I know the Builders Association is looking at doing. I get the daycare thing, and if, you know, if we can find a way to solve those issues so that we take care of the neighbors, do it. So it seems to me like, seems to me like we're going down the road of trying to do some form of PUD analysis on that, and then, and I don't want people to think that we're jerking them around on different ways to go here, but I think that would solve what happened at the Planning Commission on these other things and give them some guidance of what's going on as well. But let's take the public comment. We'll see where we are. Come on up. Come on up.
And I apologize, Mayor, for the record, Aaron West, I was explaining.
No, don't worry about it. I'm glad to see you're talking.
I was just
nice.
helping our neighbor, Ms. Brasher, understand that, because the concern again being that if we no longer own the property, would that restriction still be on there? And so I wanted her to understand that if we go back and we come through the PUD process, that is then tied to the property and not the owner. So therefore, if we go away, that property is still restricted to the uses that we come up with, which I would imagine we're talking probably professional office and daycare, and in my mind, that's about it.
I think that's what we're talking about. And we have read, I think you sent us a letter?
Yes.
I think we've all read all that. So I guess the question we have to you is, you've heard what our discussion is here. We're thinking about, you know, pulling the resolution of intent off and then saying, okay, with this property, it's going to go some form of, it's not going to be called a neighborhood business, it would be called PUD, but would essentially allow a use to continue like it is now, or perhaps even a daycare center. Now, the question that, you know, and there could be limits on, you know, what type of daycare center it is, what hours of operation, things of that nature, how many kids you can have in there, stuff like that could be done in a PUD. So that kind of, and you know, you can say whatever you want to say, but we're kind of interested in that answer.
Linda Basher for the record.
Yeah,
Hi.
I took your. Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So Aaron West and I have been speaking throughout this process. So yes, he is a good neighbor, and Bon has been a great neighbor. And obviously I've done a lot of research on this. And so my concerns obviously were sent to you all. And the biggest concern was it not looking like a residential home and what would happen over time, because I do share 84 feet of fence and one of the biggest part of it. So what you're saying with the PUD is that there would be restrictions on it moving forward, and whatever continue. And what Aaron West and I spoke this morning is a saying that I've had with my daughter that is now closer to 30, is that if one day I wake up and I'm flat like a tortilla and gone, is what would happen from that point forward if the property was sold and moved forward for it to be a neighborhood business and then be sold. Because on that list of what could potentially be neighborhood businesses could be anything from a bar to what have you. And that was what my husband and I, our concerns were, was then it could be anything and could potentially be 2 stories, etc. And with it not being a thoroughfare and that street dead ending into Ginger Lane, you know, that's scary for us, you know. And Aaron has been very nice to work with my husband and I. So I understand what you're saying with the PUD and the limitations of it being an office business or only a child care, and that would be the limitations forever, for lack of better. That does give me relief. My husband travels all the time. I don't plan to sell my home, and when Aaron and I spoke this morning, that was my concern, is what happens if it's anything and could potentially be sold by Bon and turn into a bar or a restaurant with outside or 24/7 gaming with limits like a Dottie. And that's scary to me because I do share that large fence line. So, you know, I am okay, for lack of better. My husband can't speak to you. He is transporting. He works for corrections. I don't know that he would be fully okay with that, but he trusts me somewhat. You know, I came here today with having faith in you guys and knowing that in 2001 that the board made the stipulations that they did with the same idea that that house is set back, and why that was put there before with the same board that knew that it wasn't on a corner, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm putting that same faith into you guys as well.
All right, then the board, maybe, let me just put this out for any other public comment? Let me just try this and see if that goes out, that we return this to the Planning Commission with instructions to analyze and come back with a recommendation that send it back to the Planning Commission with instructions to look at zoning this property as a form of PUD with criteria on it that meet somewhat of the original intent of what that property was supposed to be in 2001, but we would pull the resolution of intent. In other words, I know we've talked about having it in an office or just a daycare center. If that's where they want to go, it's okay with me, but I think that there are other things that it could be that are just as quiet and just as, you know, under, that they might want to say, you know, you can do this with that property too. So it gives everybody a little bit more strength, but that would take Aaron and the neighbor, Ms. Bashir, to say, you know, this is what we can look forward to in the future. So I don't know, board, is that something you want to see? Lori, you're already good on the details here.
I want to work through those details and process and make sure we're putting everything in place in the right order. And so is it a timing thing to say we're going to remove the resolution of intent at the same time we hear the NBP application? Is that what, or should we already go ahead and eliminate? This is a first reading. That's why I was asking you for a timing issue. So this is a first reading. How long, and should we remove this or hold it time-wise? That's what I'm really getting at, is help me with some structural things, Hope.
My sense would be that this would be sent back and that we would not move on the resolution of intent until we had the secondary move of what the property can do under a PUD done at the same time or simultaneously.
What he said.
You know, you're not caught in nobody's caught in a bind.
Right, and I appreciate that. For the record, Aaron West, I would agree that I think, to your point, I would like to go back and meet with Ms. Basher and look at that list and you know, fully develop a list of you know, uses that we could both support, and that could take a little time. So I think the idea that we're just referring it back, the only question I would have is, can we delay the appeal of the special use permit and the variance until we bring that whole package back to you guys? Because that would be ideal.
In terms of sequencing, in response to Supervisor Bagwell's question, what I would suggest, and I'm looking at the applicant as well to make sure he concurs, but I think the cleanest way is to refer it back to the Planning Commission, either using the words the mayor stated or similar, whatever the supervisors feel captures your intent, and to not take an action. The action is to refer back to Planning Commission. That way, when you have a full bundle of information and there's not this uncertainty floating around, because I sense you're seeking certainty, and I'm sensing that the applicant's comfortable with that. And we, staff, if the direction the mayor suggested is what the supervisors want, the mayor, staff will work with the applicant and move this forward to Planning Commission quickly. There is no application required by the applicant. This is a direction from the board.
And the question of the appeal coming forward, that would just be held in abeyance?
Not quite in abeyance. It will be part of the package. So the timing will be all aligned.
New package.
Well, it'll be a new package, so it might be a different vote.
I got this. Hang on, John, because we got the stink eye from the DA, so before we go too far down the road.
Mayor, I was just going to say my recommendation would be for you to, as the mayor, would just revert it back to staff with the consensus recommendation, not take a vote on it. Based on how the agenda reads.
So we wouldn't have to take a vote to send it back, we would just...
You can not, the vote could be that you are not rescinding the resolution,
Right.
and then
I
you
think
would have instructions.
We can do that. We'll craft something here. But
Okay.
John, I'm sorry, I didn't know she was going to jump in the middle there.
Can I jump in there on the record?
Sure.
My fear is that right now, the application is live.
Yeah.
And so if you guys refer it back, then it stays live and it helps us. If you deny it, then we have to start over.
And we're not going to do that. We're going to stay live. Don't worry about it. I mean, we all want to live, right? Okay. I mean, we're trying to find a way to, and I think, this Solomon sometimes has a hard time, but I think we're going down the right road. Let's see if we can make it work. And your neighbors seem to be willing to be accommodating. And I think this is one where the parties understand each other's position. They don't want, and so let's just see if that works, and then we'll go from there. So we'll entertain a motion. You want to try a motion? We'll see where it goes. Oh, we don't need a bill.
Oh, we don't need a bill.
We just need a
We're just gonna refer it to
the motion let me just try it here. The motion would be that we were going to refer,
No action.
No action.
We don't need to take any action because
That's
just the
correct.
record itself can stand, so no action.
no action. We can do that.
You need action?
Apparently they do.
Do you want to just direct staff, like she said there?
Yes.
Well, let's say we refer it back to the planning commission.
Yes.
Direct staff
Let's-
to take it back to the planning commission.
All right.
And you have the direction.
So, yeah.
All right, there's a motion then to direct staff to take this back to the planning commission to further consider the uses, the acceptable uses on this property. All right, on the motion, is there a second?
Second.
I don't need to have a second on that one? Come on.
Mayor, you
I'm happy-
have the authority as mayor to just revert it back to staff, and based on your discussion here
That's what I-
today,
that's what I
to
thought I did.
recommend.
No-
And you
no
wouldn't
motion,
have to
no
take a motion on it.
No motion, just a direction. You just direct staff pursuant to our discussions today.
It's about as clear as the resolution of intent.
No second.
All right. Unless there's anything further, this item is concluded. We're now going to move on. We'll take up other items then. Thank you all. All right. All right, we're going to be in recess for about 5 or 10 minutes, and we'll come back and we're going to pick up with PUD and then marijuana stuff.
We gotta write those better. You know what I mean? That we can also give other direction.
take up item 26 Charlie. This is approve a tentative plan unit development request from Liberty Homes. Who's doing this? Ms. Dorpansky? Go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the record, Susan Pansky. This is a request to amend the existing Riverview Terrace planned unit development to take 2 existing lots and divide them into 5 within the single-family 21,000 PUD district. This is an aerial that shows essentially the Riverview Terrace PUD. It is east of the Fairview Drive 5th Street intersection. This is the PUD here. Consists of 262 lots that were approved in 1978 by the Board of Supervisors. A little bit closer aerial showing the 2 lots in question. This is about...
Maybe I should file a disclosure.
Oh, right.
Because I think I was involved in 1978. I argued,
looking at it?
I argued that we should have a fence there.
He did. It's in the record. That's
And
right.
we got the fence, right? Okay, all right, go. Young lawyer.
That's right. Okay, so the 2 subject properties are highlighted on your screen. It's about 3 acres, just over 3 acres. And it's along Hells Bells Road, just before the intersection of Park Hill Drive. This is the proposed tentative map. It's 5 lots, as I mentioned, with an average size of around 26,000 square feet. That's consistent with the single-family 21,000 PUD district. And the reason why we're doing a PUD amendment is because the addition of these 3 lots will take the overall unit count from 262 to 265, but still consistent with the underlying zoning. So staff doesn't have a concern about this addition. And there is no modification to the required open space because open space is based on the percentage of the total area, not the number of lots. So we're covered there. As you can see from this map, this is a pretty steep area. You can see the cut that they're proposing to get their flat pads near the street. These lots are subject to hillside development standards. The overall average of the lots with the slope is over 15%. However, the developed area that they're proposing is only at 11%. So while they're subject to the standards, they don't have to incorporate a special use permit into this request. There is a variance, however, incorporated into this request, and it's based on lot depth. So the single-family 21,000 square foot district has a maximum lot depth of 240 feet. I think in some cases it goes up to over 100 feet past that. However, that was an existing condition in the PUD. So basically we're just taking and we're doing a couple more lots that would have that. Staff doesn't have a concern and is supportive of it because it was existing before, but also because a lot of those lots are not going to be developable because of the slope. So you can see basically where those cuts are. That's the extent of their developed area.
Susan, on that, when you look at the topo map overlaid, yeah, that one, the first 4 lots, so I can see that the pad sites cut in, that I can see how they can meet the requirements except maybe lot 4. But the driveways are what concern me, is that the first 4 lots are, like some of these cross like 5 topo lines. I can't see on the topo map what the lineal footage is between the topo lines, but have you looked at that to make sure that the driveways themselves will meet grade requirements?
I haven't personally, and unfortunately no one from engineering is here to speak to that. They didn't identify it in their review, so that leads me to believe that they felt it met the standards, but maybe the applicant's representative can address that during his portion. And actually, I don't have a whole lot more to say, so I can wrap it up and I'll turn it over to Chris Baker. So these are the proposed elevations. There are 3. They range in size from about 1,740 square feet to 1,940 square feet, all single story. And I'm just going to leave it on the site plan and say that Planning Commission recommended approval by a vote of 5-0 with 1 absent and 1 vacancy on their board. Staff is recommending approval as well with the conditions of approval outlined in the staff report. I'm happy to answer questions, and Chris Baker from Manhart is here to represent the applicant, and I'm sure he'll answer questions.
Come on up and talk to us about the driveways if you've got an answer. That's good.
Chris Baker, for the record, with Manhart Consulting.
Thanks, Susan, for the overview. I'm going to reserve the majority of my time for any questions you may have. I'll start off with the
That's fine,
driveways.
just answer the first question. And
The Hillside ordinance allows for driveways up to 12%. We've accounted for that. Really, they're just going to be longer driveways. You're looking at 30-plus feet instead of your standard 20, 25. So those are just kind of conceptual footprints that we're putting on there now. One thing I would like to point out is once we found out this wasn't a PUD and it was just not going to be a standard parcel map, the applicant did have a neighborhood meeting and has been in correspondence with the one existing neighbor and working with them to ensure that the design is in accordance with their wishes.
questions? Anybody? I don't see any questions. Public comment? All right. Motion's in order. Supervisor Abad.
I move to approve TPUD-17-053, a tentative planned unit development request from Liberty Homes LLC, property owner Vernon C. Lee Family Trust, to amend the existing Riverview Terrace planned unit development to divide 2 parcels into 5 on property zone single-family 21,000 planned unit development located at 4404 and 4080 Hells Bells Road. APNs 010-361-05 and 06, based on the findings and subject to the conditions of approval in the staff report.
Motion and a second on the motion. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried unanimous. Okay, let's take up 26 Delta. This is possibly to introduce on first reading an ordinance amending Title 18, Development Standards, to clarify that single-family residential and two-family dwellings may comply with the open space requirements either through common or private open space. Hope you're back.
I'm back in this. You saw something very similar to this on April 20th, and you introduced an ordinance. And after that, what that ordinance said is that single-family residential and duplexes were exempt from the common open space. After you introduced that, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Townhouses are considered single-family residential. So I thought, gosh, I can't just exempt them. So with that whole concept of a single-family house can have a private open space in their backyard, just basic what everyone grew up with. We don't want to force HOAs. I'm recommending changing the wording to say that single-family residential and duplexes can meet the requirement for common open space through common or private open space. So the amount of open space will be there. It can either be provided as private or as common. And the Planning Commission did review this amendment at its meeting of May 24th and recommended approval by a vote of 4-0 with 2 absent. I'm happy to answer questions.
Hope, what is the requirement for open space? Is it
250 square feet per unit. It's 100 that can be private or common, and 150 per unit has to be common.
Okay, I'm just trying to run through with this change in language. I'm just trying to run through all the different scenarios in my mind to make sure that they'll be able to comply without any problem.
Seems like a reasonable request to do to solve an issue that's there that protects open space as well as development. All right. Board questions? Any further ones of hope? Public comment? Anybody want to weigh in on this one? I don't see any. Supervisor Bonkowski, you want to make a motion? I see your finger on the button there.
Bill 115.
I move to introduce on first reading Bill number 115, an ordinance amending Title 18, Chapter 18.16, Development Standards, Division 1, Land Use and Site Design, Section 1.17, Multifamily Apartment Development Standards, and Section 1.18, Residential Development Standards in Non-Residential Districts, to clarify that single-family residential development and two-family dwellings may comply with open space requirements either through common or private open space based on the findings contained in the staff report.
And a motion and second on a motion. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried unanimous. Okay, let's take up item 26 Echo. This is to possibly extend, adopt a resolution that possibly extends the moratorium that we've adopted by ordinance number 2017-3, that's marijuana, for a period up to 60 days with an expiration date of September 19th, 2017, That would extend it from July 21st. Okay. Who's doing this one? Disclosures. Huh? Disclosures? I gotta have one too, sorry. Okay, go, Brad.
NRS 281A.420 requires me to disclose a conflict of interest and abstain from participating when I have a disqualifying conflict. In my private commitment, I am a partner in the real estate brokerage firm NAI Alliance Carson City. NAI has in the past and may in the future represent clients that are looking for space for medical or recreational marijuana businesses. However, none of the brokers in my office are currently doing this. Since no substantial and continuing business relationships exist requiring my abstention, and the possibility that there may be such a client in the future is speculative, my public duty is to vote absent a clear conflict of interest. Furthermore, our decision here today on this item will affect all marijuana businesses the same. No one entity stands to gain or lose any more than any other. Therefore, I will be voting on this matter.
Okay. I also have a disclosure to make because I've talked to the district attorney, and it's the same disclosure I've made earlier on this type of issue. NRS 281A.420 requires me to disclose a conflict of interest and abstain from participating when I have a disqualifying conflict. In my private commitment, I'm a retired partner for the law firm of Kemper Kroll. Although I'm retired, they do provide an office for me if I want to use it. However, I don't receive a paycheck or pension. The firm, which has offices in Carson City, Reno, and Las Vegas, represents marijuana industry clients. However, none of the attorneys in Carson City office represent Carson City marijuana establishments. Further, the item before the board will affect all marijuana businesses the same. No one entity stands to gain or lose any more than any other. Therefore, under the ethics law, unless there's disqualifying interest, I'm required to vote, so I will be voting on this matter. Okay. All right. Go.
For the record, Lee Plamo Community. Echoing. Is that echoing?
That might be on.
Says all. Lee Plamo, Community Development Director. So as you introduced this item, the city currently has a moratorium on the acceptance of all applications. We're currently prohibiting all new marijuana facilities, excluding the existing medical marijuana establishments that already have approval with the state. That moratorium and prohibition will expire on July 21st. Without this action by the Carson City Municipal Code, by adoption of a resolution, you can extend it for up to 60 days, which will take this particular moratorium out to September 19th, 2017. Just to note, also on this agenda, there's another item. That's the next item is another resolution that, per the direction of the Board of Supervisors, the last meeting or last month, was to initiate the process. So that under this moratorium, we can extend this particular moratorium no further. So to extend it past that September 19th deadline, if necessary, we need to initiate another one and start over, which means the second resolution you'll initiate. And we'll go back to the Planning Commission, adopt an ordinance, consider the period in which that for which that'll be effective, which will, I think, will likely be through the end of the year to match up with state timelines, and certainly that's within a time frame that we can consider and certainly adopt final regulations for zoning and business licenses in Carson City. Should have said up front, that's the purpose of the moratorium, and the prohibition now is to give the city time to consider the effects and consider regulations for marijuana establishments pursuant to the legislation, the ballot measure that was passed in 2016, and additionally considering legislation that was just passed recently by the state legislature relating to it. To that, I'll mention, because this discussion will probably come up, it's identified more in the staff report for the second regulation, but we have prepared and distributed a business impact statement for potential fees for cultivation, production, and distribution facilities, and distributed that out, which we plan to bring back for discussion to the Board of Supervisors on July 6th. So those business impact fees are the maximum possible impact fees pursuant to the bill adopted at the legislature. I'm not sure if I got the number right. I won't say it because I'm not sure I got it right, but the bill passed that authorized us to implement business license and fees. We've done that, so we'll have that discussion. I also particularly want to note that we have a public workshop scheduled for June 20th. That's next Tuesday at 5 o'clock here in this building. A major purpose of which is we're going to have Dagny Stapleton with the Nevada Association of Counties give an overview of the ballot measure, what's legal in Nevada, and then also the any bills that were passed related to it. So to kind of frame the issues of what is within the city's purview to regulate and what isn't, to be able to get that public information out and to start to have some public discussion and comments to bring back to the board on potential regulations as directed by the board last time. So again, we're recommending, I'll conclude with that, we're recommending approval of this resolution and the next one as well at your direction, and be happy to answer questions.
Board questions of Lee? Public comment? Mr. Adler?
Will Adler with the Sierra Cannabis Coalition, and it is Senate Bill 487, Lee. All right, you got it. Okay. So I do feel that the legislature's tied up. We do have the bills now, and it would be good to get a third-party perspective from Dagny Stapleton on what passed, what's still to come, and then what the process is. So currently under the medical marijuana program, we're operating under the 453A statute. Under the recreational program, we'll be under 453D. And then right now we're in sort of a pigeon of the two, a combination in the early start temporary regulations that passed May 8th. So those are now taking effect July 1st through the end of April. That's sort of a temporary licensing period for recreational marijuana for cultivation, production, dispensing, and laboratory testing of marijuana. And then we will also have this other issue of marijuana transportation that is also going on. So I just want to bring that up and make you aware of that. There's currently a lawsuit going on, some uncertainty on that. So it is not just Carson City that is having a growth period with marijuana. Is actually completely normal, and a lot of governments are looking into it. Reno went forward and did license their medical marijuana operators to have a temporary license, and they issued them a temporary license that expires at the end of April for recreational sale of marijuana because they felt like it was inappropriate until the permanent regs were done in January to declare you were a permanent recreational provider of marijuana, whether cultivated, produced, or dispensed. So it is a moving, ball, and a lot of different governments are doing it differently. So I think it's totally appropriate to do a moratorium, to September, give you some time to assess everything that's going on and what's going on here, because you're able to work on your ordinances and you're able to look at everything that's going on, and there are several moving things still, and we'll see how it looks in September, I believe. And
I think the trial on the distributor issue is going on Monday.
It is. So we had the first hearing this week that was a motion to dismiss from the Department of Taxation, and it was heard and arguments, counter arguments, and they said they wouldn't do a full dismissal, but they did not agree with the distributor's argument, the initial argument. So we will see where that ends up. On Monday, if I had to bet, I would say the governor issued a declaration to have recreational marijuana July 1st to make it inside the budgetary biennium because that's the first day of the budget. He will probably ask for the Attorney General or others to, proceed as best they can to get that date there as well. So I don't know what it will look like after Monday, but I assume they'll be moving forward as quickly as they can.
All right, thank you. Any other public comment? Anybody? Board, we okay? Somebody want to make a motion? We'll see where it goes.
What's the number? 2017 R23.
I move to adopt resolution number 2017 R23, extending the moratorium adopted by ordinance number 2017-3 for a period of 60 days from the expiration date of July 21, 2017 to the new expiration date of September 19, 2017 on the acceptance and processing of planning or other applications for construction or operation of new marijuana establishments.
There's a motion and a second on the motion. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Carried. Okay. We all right there, City Manager? You're all right. All right. Let's take up 26 Foxtrot. This is the companion resolution, and we will have the disclosures that Supervisor Bonkowski and myself made on the earlier item apply to this item. Is there any concern? Anybody want me to hear that disclosure again? I don't see any. Okay. All right. Take us through what's on the second one here.
So at Lee Plamo Community Development. So as mentioned previously, this one would start to initiate a new moratorium that could be implemented for up to 180 days per the code. So we need to start this process in order to have it implemented by the expiration of the one that you just approved. We need to start initiating it now. We'll consider the timeframes and other appropriate things to go through the planning commission and bring a recommendation back to you. And I would just add to all the other discussion that none of this prevents the adoption of regulations or an ordinance prior to the expiration of these moratoriums, and so we're working towards that, and basically any regulation that comes forward would then rescind and supersede the moratorium at that time.
Okay. Supervisor Bonkowski.
Lee, do you believe it would be helpful if this body gave you direction to give to the Planning Commission as to why we're implementing this, or do you think that they have a good enough grasp, or they'll watch this so that they understand what our intent is? Because I just don't want to go sideways with them bringing forward a recommendation that circumvents what it is that we're trying to do. I understand that we're the final authority, but I just want to make sure that they have an understanding of why we're asking them to do this.
Well, if I have it correct to pass on to them, it's so that to ensure that we have time to adopt appropriate regulations based on waiting for state regulations, which we have the temporary regulations in, conduct public meetings to consider all sides, and in the event that there's other lawsuits and things that might delay things for us.
Right, so if we're not done by September 19th, then we need to have this in place.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Public comment? Anybody want to weigh in?
Mr. Mayor, Jim Hartman for the record. I want to.
Good morning.
I want to commend the commission for taking the first action and the anticipated second action today. I don't want to be the nattering nabob of negativism here on the subject of marijuana, but I think caution is the watchword that needs to be looked at. And I would commend to this body an examination of what has taken place or is taking place in Colorado. Commend the comments of Governor Hickenlooper, who urged people to wait 2 or 3 years before legalizing. The former Attorney General of the state of Colorado.
That
and the
issue's
current
already been crossed in this state, the legalization.
Well, what I'm getting at is caution, not in legalizing, but how you go about the process. That, I think, is important. And the cautions are set up by former mayor of Denver. I just think you need to look at all the unintended consequences.
Would you disagree with me, though, that marijuana is legal in the state of Nevada as of July 1?
Yeah, there's no question.
Actually,
it was legal on the 1st of January.
1st of January.
Yeah.
Would you agree with me that we have to deal with marijuana incidents, whether we pass an ordinance zoning them out or in?
Yeah, the question here is not whether it's legal or not. The question is one of commercialization and how you go about that process. And that's the issue. And that's,
I agree.
And let me just conclude, rather than getting into a debate with you, Mr. Mayor, is I would caution people to look at, there's going to be all kinds of flashy numbers about how much tax revenue is going to get raised. And I would urge you to go back and look the first year in Colorado, there was a forecast of $100 million of tax revenue. And the reality was they raised $33.5 million. Numbers are coming in from Alaska right now that legalized a year ago. And the first year, they first forecast that there would be $12 million of tax revenue coming in Alaska. That was then reduced to, the expectation would be $5 million. Well, the reality is on the end of June, when their fiscal year ends, it's more likely to be $2 million, about 1/6 of what they were anticipating. I just say, go into this process with your eyes wide open here, and look at the unintended consequences of all this, rather than in a huge hurry to see establishments open.
Is marijuana prevalent in Douglas County now?
I'm not familiar with how much marijuana there is in use in Douglas County right now.
Would it surprise you that or at least I've been told that half the sales that coming out of the medical marijuana stores in Carson City go to Douglas County door to door?
Yeah, you know what I would say? I would say that's probably speculation on your part, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, all right.
So just, the mayor's kind of got the same thought I did. On July 1st, assuming that the lawsuit gets settled, I can pick up my phone, I can call a dispensary in Reno, and I can have them deliver marijuana to my home in Carson City. So I think that we are being prudent, and that our eyes are wide open, because we have to deal with the problem. We're going to have enforcement costs that we're going to have to bear. We can't prevent marijuana from coming into our city, whether that comes through Reno or whether we are the drivers and we set the regulations and the land use codes to control it in our county. I'd rather be in the driver's seat, number one, and I would like to at least have the option of trying to recover our costs. And the only way that we can do that is to be able to charge some fees to offset those costs. So from my perspective, we have been very diligent in this matter, and I believe that we are making the right decisions and following this process the right way. What we're not doing is what Clark County and Washoe County are doing, which is putting business licenses in place for July 1st. We're going to make sure that we get our ordinances right, but at the same time, we have other issues that we have to deal with, and we cannot prevent marijuana from coming into Carson City. We can't do it. So speaking to the impacts, we're going to have to deal with the impacts regardless. So I'd rather be in the driver's seat. I'd rather set our own goals and our own rules and at least try to recover some of the cost.
I'm here to commend you for the moratorium.
Jim,
I'm sorry,
turn the light on.
For the record, I commend you for the moratorium for 2 additional months, and commend you also for extending that moratorium into the future. And I expect and would hope that Carson will move forward in an expeditious way, but also in a prudent way.
Okay. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
You're always welcome here, by the way. Somebody, public comment. Ms. Bartos, go.
For the record, Kathy Bartos, Partnership Carson City. And I really agree with some of the comments that Brad just made, that this isn't a simple process, that we're not looking just at what regulations we need to deal with that are state-oriented and we really don't have any wiggle room with. There are a few we do have wiggle room with, and that's where the last motion that you did at the past meeting, Supervisor Abad, was perfect, that you're allowing for a working group who is multidisciplinary, where you're getting the police and the school, the health people in one room together and hearing about the impact on their organizations and the work that they do when it's blended. So that's an excellent idea, and I think that moving forward with that is very prudent on the part of the board. So I believe that putting that working group together takes just a little bit of time in terms of we need to have certain sectors represented, such as law enforcement, et cetera, and who would be the best people to be on that working group representing those sectors, and those ideas brought back to this board to make a final selection. That right there is going to take a little over a month. We are in summer here. It's harder to get people together. So once September comes around, it would be good to have at least the option of going a little bit longer so that we can do due diligence in supporting those individuals and those organizations that will be having a piece in either the production, the distribution, or the fallout of marijuana in Carson City. And that's the purpose of the work study group, not just to look at the regulations and find out what we need to do here in Carson City, because as our city supervisor city manager has told us, is that a lot of that is already cast in stone for us, but there is wiggle room. For example, with the dispensaries, are we zoning out and saying no way, no how? Are we saying yes, our 2 medical marijuana facilities can move forward with recreational? Or are we saying, hey, let's go and grab up all 4 and put them all over town? So that's just one example of where we need to make some individual decisions. So I would be very much in favor of giving us the option not to dead end this in September if the good conversation is going on. If decisions are made by then, great, good for us. But we may need a little more time. So I would encourage you to give us that flexibility when you consider this agenda item. Thank you.
Yeah, Kathy, I think, one, you're very well spoken. You know, just kind of cap things up a little bit here. We've had some internal analysis done on what the cost of enforcement would be, whether you zone it in or you zone it out. And that number is about close to $500,000, $440,000. Whether you zone it in or you zone it out. And so one of the questions I think that I'd ask the working group to take a look at is, you know, if we're going to incur those costs no matter what, and you tell me to zone it out, tell me where the funds are going to come from that I have to do to deal with it from this dais up here.
I think that's an excellent example of why we have a working group and why you would have multiple disciplinary people looking at that issue and even reviewing those numbers to see whether or not they're actually viable.
No, Mr. Mayor, I would just like to add to that, and I spoke with Kathy at length out in the hallway during the previous item. So a lot of the work that we've done internally is information that we need to get out to the public at large and to the working group that will put together maybe multiple working groups. But I think we'll be able to get together. We're going to kick it off on June 20th, coming up here in the Sierra Room. But I think it's going to be important that the public understands not only the legal landscape that we're operating in, the impact to the community from really, as Kathy said, from a multidisciplinary approach. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of work that we've already done internally. I think Kathy made a good comment to me because I told her, look, I've spent my life in an organization that had zero tolerance for drugs, and we've got to wrap our heads around what the voters approve. She said, yeah, but you've also spent your life in an organization that valued secrecy. So we haven't intended it to be that way, but there's a lot of work that we've done internally that I do think we need to get out in terms of impacts, in terms of what the county, what the Board of Supervisors here what you can even regulate and what you can't regulate. And I think that information, that iterative process is going to be a healthy one.
Comments? I just say that I too was in that same issue with respect to zero tolerance. Go.
I just want to make a comment, and Kathy, this pertains to what you're saying as well. And this board is charged with the health, safety, and welfare of our community going forward, so we have an obligation to get this right. And the fact that the legal aspects of this are kind of outpacing the science is concerning me. And the other concern to me, I was at a Nevada Works meeting this past weekend, or past Friday, and sitting next to the head of Renown, and what they're seeing in the emergency rooms with regards to the edibles. And if this working group can put forward a major voice that needs to be heard, that is in the labeling of edibles. They should be regulated by body weight. And that would make a huge difference with regards to that. That is a major concern. Another reason why we need to take time to get this right, so that we're not impacting our community in a negative fashion.
Thank you. I really see you've done a lot of your homework there. It's not fun, is it?
Thanks, Kathy. Anything further?
Just a comment.
Yeah, comments in order.
You know, and I appreciate too, and I'd like the working group to maybe consider issues. You know, we've just done Richards Crossing with some public housing. We have some others in town. And I think it's also great to get information out to the public that it would still be illegal. Just because you're going to reside in Carson City, if you live in a public housing facility, you can still not do it. So I think it's imperative that everyone realize it's still federally against the law. And so I don't want some of our residents thinking it's legal and they can do it. You can't do it in a public housing environment. So information is very powerful.
If I could, I would like to make another public comment, and I actually agree. Will Adler, for the record, representing Sierra Cannabis Coalition. Thank you very much. One thing that was requested by the City of Reno Council was a FAQ sheet or informational handout that the dispensaries and other folks would give to the community upon that. The state is working on one that the state will produce and give us the handout, but they asked for us to make our own. And in addition, the RGJ had a great article that said frequently asked questions, how to break them down. You know, public housing was one of the questions, things like that. So it is something that we're going to go forward with as an industry and do our own due diligence to inform the public. But it could be something that we present at the community meeting on the 20th or at the board meeting here to show the kind of material we are going to be handing out, because it's not for, you know, local governments or anyone else. It's for our own due diligence and our own perception, because if there's an accident, if there's an incident, or if there's somebody who felt like they weren't informed, it hits us first before it even hit you guys. So it is in our best interest to do that, and we can present those materials to you as well, because we want to be a participant in the community, not a hindrance to it. Thank you.
Brett.
Thank you for those comments, Will. And just piggybacking on what Lori was mentioning about public housing, it actually goes beyond public housing into HUD subsidized housing. And this speaks to something that Steve mentioned about unintended consequences. I, as a private property owner, if I own a fourplex, and I've gotten it approved for HUD subsidized payments, and then somebody gets busted smoking pot inside there, there's the potential for forfeiture of that property. So that's the kind of stuff that we need to get that information out to the public, because they aren't going to be aware of that. And depending on which administration is in the White House and what their enforcement activities are, I mean, this whole business is just crazy.
I agree. It is one where not just the user of the product, but landlords, owners of properties, things like that should be informed to implement their own policies and their rental statements and other things, because it will fall on the owner of a property if they don't do their own due diligence. So yet again, more information the better, and we should be informing the community. But if nobody's there to inform them, it does not stop the use of marijuana or other illicit substances, for that matter, in these properties either. So to your previous comments, there's nothing that stops a legal delivery or that individual who lives there from driving up to Reno and then driving back with it. So that is something to take into account. But I think Carson City is doing a lot of due diligence and taking the right approach of more information the better, caution, and proceed when you're comfortable. And I think we're getting there. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, that's what's happening right now, is that, you know, marijuana, like it or not, is legal. And so a lot of the sales that I was talking to Mr. Hartman about are just personal deliveries. Call up, it's like Amazon. Call up, give them your credit card number or whatever, and it's delivered to your door.
By drone?
Or by somewhere, what Jeff Bezos said is going to be by drone. And Jim, that's what, you know, I don't hear those things from you in there, is that, you know, there's an incidence of that affects society whatever we do. And so we're trying to find a way here so that we can at least, you know that we've either minimized it or found some way to deal with these things. And so, you know, that's where life is. And to a certain degree, you know, some of the arguments we hear are arguments that really go to the merit, to go to whether or not the voters should have passed the resolution in the first place. In my view, that's water under the bridge. I mean, that's a law. And granted, I guess, there's a Schedule 1, I know that's, there's a Schedule 1 drug is outlawed by the federal government. On the other hand, this state has, by a vote of the people, a different law. And there has been, to date, nobody has wanted to take on the issue of supremacy. Nobody has done that. There's been no litigation that's gone to the Supreme Court or anywhere that I can find that deals with supremacy, that whose law applies. And Jim may come up and tell me I'm wrong, but you're welcome to do that, Jim. Come on up.
Yeah, actually, I am going to tell you, Mr. Mayor, that you're wrong. There's a case, Gonzalez versus Raich, R-A-I-C-H, from 2005, that set forth that the Commerce Clause in the Constitution gives to the federal government, under the Controlled Substance Act, a supremacy over state laws on recreational marijuana and even medical marijuana. So I would cite you to Gonzalez versus Raich, R-A-I-C-H.
Yeah, I've read that, but nobody, let's just get it down right to home here. Nobody in this state has ever raised that issue, nor has the federal government, to my knowledge, come into Nevada and said, your law is unlawful. I mean, maybe I'm missing that.
Well, I think what happened at the federal level is there was a memorandum from the Obama administration that basically allowed states like Colorado to go forward. That memorandum can be withdrawn at any time by the new administration, and the existing law, the federal law, on the subject of supremacy, or the Commerce Clause, is covered under Gonzalez versus Raich. It was a California recreational marijuana case.
You and I may have a different view on Raich, but I assume that you're correct, Jim. I don't want to get in a legal argument.
But let me just, on the subject of Colorado, for example, when I say, gee, take a look at what some of the issues are in Colorado. One of the issues that I think we need to look at is, at what level of taxation do you begin developing a major black market? I mean, everybody's going to say, I want a piece of this marijuana. We're going to put a 3% license fee on it, or the sales tax, or a wholesale tax, or a retail tax. The fact of the matter is, in Colorado right now, what they're saying is that when they have a combined 28% tax rate, they've got a huge black market. And in fact, the current Attorney General of the state will say, we have as big a black market in marijuana today as we did before we legalized recreational marijuana. And on July 1, because of this big black market and a 28% combined tax rate, they are convinced that they should reduce and have their tax rate down to 26% in an effort to get rid of the black market. My only point is there are a lot of consequences here, a lot of things people need to look at that are impacted by how you go about legalizing. It sounds great to, oh, gee, we're going to slap on a 3% license fee here. But do you then compound the problem of a black market? I'm just saying this is a confusing issue, and we don't know where the feds are going. And we've also got this major issue of liquor distributors in court. We won't know where that case goes until Monday of next week. There's just a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah.
So my briefest comment on that is we pay 34% tax to the federal government today for all marijuana businesses in Nevada, Colorado, California, yet we are not allowed to write off our business expenses for under 280E. So the federal government loves marijuana because we pay our full tax like no other business has paid their tax ever in the history of the United States tax code, because we're not allowed to write it off, but they still charge us in full for our taxes and they collect it however we pay them. So there's not been a lot of topward pressure to stop these industries, and then states that have it, like Colorado, like Washington, have said if there is an effort from any administration, Obama or Trump, that they would take it to court and tie it up as long as they could and indefinitely, because Colorado has, their attorney general has had the statement that they would go into an immediate recession and would have zero ability to enforce a top-down effort to enforce a marijuana restriction, because their example was if you take something that is illegal and then make it legal, the cost to the community is far less than if you take something that is legal and make it illegal. They had the example of prohibition, the inability of police officers to actually enforce prohibition because it was a legal substance that became illegal and there was not enough law enforcement out there to enforce it. In states like Colorado, states like Washington, the same is true. They would have to staff up to, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars degree that it would far outweigh any social benefit they would get. The cost would be so extreme to enforce it that they said they would fight it to the end of time if there was a reduction in the federal government's policy to allow states to enact their own marijuana policies. So their attorney generals came out pretty strong and said that already. Thank you. Will Adler for the record.
Jim, medical marijuana has been legal under our Constitution since 2001. Has any attempt ever been to, under anybody's jurisdiction, federal jurisdiction, has anybody attempted to say that that's an unconstitutional provision or a constitution?
Yeah, I don't know that it's been litigated.
Okay. And I hear the argument now and then that medical marijuana is okay because it deals with things. Medical marijuana is not permitted under is a Schedule I drug as well, correct?
Well, marijuana is a Schedule I substance.
So whether you call it medical marijuana or you call it marijuana, it's a Schedule I drug.
Substance,
so
even hemp is a Schedule I drug, for the record.
Pardon me?
Even hemp, a non-psychoactive industrial product, is a Schedule I drug under federal law. And we just passed a hemp bill as well this year. Right. Will Adler, for the record.
You know, we're going to. I think Supervisor Bankowski put it nail. You know, said it right. You know, we're going to extend the moratorium here. We're going to see what's out there. Have our working group come back and report to us what it is. And again, you know, I would just ask the working group. You know, we have to deal with, in my view, maybe I'm all wet here, but in my view, we have to deal with a problem that's going to be, or an issue. Some people would call it a problem, others call it an issue of marijuana, whether it's medical marijuana or marijuana. And it's not helpful to just say, well, just keep putting it away, because as of January 1, we got people using marijuana. And you got them down in Douglas County, too. You got it. And so somewhere we have to deal with that. And that's all I'm asking. You know, we want to deal with it in a responsible way that we can. Understanding, you know, there's a nuance between the federal law and the local law. And I would almost suggest, you know, that we have a federal law, but it was never subject to a vote of the people. And we always try and get to a vote of the people. I know, and here, you know, when there is a vote of the people, well, now suddenly the federal law applies. I mean, it's those things, you know, and I get, you know, that we want to pick the law that fits our psyche. But again, the point I raise that is that we have to deal with an issue here, period. And so just help us do that.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm trying to. Okay. And all I am suggesting to this body is that they go forward prudently and carefully, look at the consequences, study what's happened in Colorado, look at towns that are maybe similar to Carson, Pueblo, Colorado, Durango, Colorado.
And what do we do with that?
Learn from it. A question of learn from it as to how and how many sites, how many establishments you have, what you do with them, where you locate them, all of that. Those are issues.
I can go down that road,
Yeah.
but I think that's the limit of our jurisdiction. How many you have, and where you cite them.
I would argue that you have a zoning power where you could prohibit any commercial establishments.
That's what I just said. I think that's within our jurisdiction.
Right.
The zoning issues.
Correct.
The other side issues, I'm not certain that you can. And I'd ask you to keep in mind that our analysis, at least, you know, subject to what our forums are going to say, shows that we're going to have a cost associated with enforcement, whether we zone it in or we zone it out. And I think, you know, we need to keep that, I need to keep that in mind. I would suggest we all need to keep that in mind, because again, that's where we're going in terms of orderly and in some way dealing with an issue. And I think the city manager and I both came through a situation where we're dealing with something here that both of us grew up in a situation where there was zero tolerance. I mean, it's not easy for me to sit up here and talk about marijuana. But it's not, but you know, I do have some respect for the voters, and I do have some respect for the fact that our Constitution has a provision for medical marijuana. It's not a, it's a constitutional provision that's against Schedule I, but it's a voter here. So, you know, I need, you know, to go back, I think our jurisdiction is limited by zoning issues, our zoning power, and we'll see how far that goes. But if it goes further than, and I agree with you that, you know, we can look at other jurisdictions as to, you know, whether or not, you know, what happened. But I'm not certain that all those jurisdictions had legalized marijuana, period. And you know, I know that you're down in Douglas County, and one of the things that bothers me is that, you know, in Douglas County, marijuana is legal as well. I mean, your folks down there are buying it from here. They're having it delivered to their doorstep. But yet, you tell me that, hey, they've already zoned it out.
Yeah.
What good does it do?
Well, Mr. Mayor, we could probably carry this debate on a lot longer, but let me just say, when I say it's a matter of how much or how little, I think I mentioned last meeting that 73% of the jurisdictions in Colorado have essentially opted out or zoned it out. The lion's share, 215 of 296 jurisdictions. It's legal and commercially available in Denver. And there are 215, at last count, 215 retail stores. So there's a real question of, gee, do you zone it out or do you go the route of Denver with 215 commercial retail marijuana stores? I'll take you around sometime in Denver and show you the various Freakies, for example, one of the chains in Denver. I mean, does Carson want to go the route of Denver? Or does it want to go the route of a community that elects not to commercialize it here?
We can't go down. We're not going down that road. Nobody's ever suggested we do. And you know, and I can take you to a home in Douglas County that's buying marijuana right now. We won't. We'll argue outside.
Well,
somewhere.
yeah.
But
let's
anyway.
pick on Elko County next time.
You're a good man, Mr.
We'll add this. Elko
man.
County gets
You're a good
deliveries
man.
as well.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Go. All right.
Jim,
All right, folks.
Jim, I had a question for Jim. You've cited a lot of stuff. You sent me some stuff. I'm sure you sent everybody on the board the same stuff, as I recall. Have you any statistics out of Colorado? And I already told you in a previous back and forth, I don't really care too much what goes on in other jurisdictions. I care, but I don't get too excited about it. But if you're going to cite those statistics, do you have any statistics about what happens when people drive from Fort Collins, I'm just picking them, I don't know whether they're legal there, it's legal there or not, to Denver and then turns around and goes back on accidents? Have there been any studies done about whether they've gone up? I've already on record as saying I don't like the fact that we've got it, but we've got it. The points are that, and we are delaying it, which is what you're really pushing us to do. So, but since you want to have this discussion.
I don't have anything off the top on Colorado statistics, but I do know that in Washington and Oregon, there's been an increase in incidents of marijuana-related automobile accidents.
Yeah,
and I think that's also true in Colorado. But I can't today sit here and cite a specific study, but I have seen statistics from AAA related to Oregon, Washington, Colorado. I mean, it sort of logically follows, I think. If you have more use, you're going to have more abuse.
It does, and of course, one of my concerns is that these people who do this, not everybody will have it delivered, although there will be deliveries, will drive to Reno and stop off at the local bar while they're there and have some convivial talk, and then buy their stuff on the way out of town and toke up before they even start back and wind up in Carson City in two inebriated states, shall we say. So I'm not saying that, I think we're doing what you're asking us to do, and we're trying to look at it as closely as we can, but that's of a concern to me.
And I appreciate that.
Thanks, Jim. Anything, you want to add anything, Jim? Because we're gonna do what you asked us to do. We're gonna pass this moratorium right now.
Yeah. Should stop while I was ahead.
Okay, thanks. All right. Further public comment? Anybody? All right. Motion's in order.
I'll do it. Is it R24? Okay. I move to adopt resolution number 2017 R24, a resolution to initiate the process for declaring a new moratorium on the acceptance and processing of planning or other applications for the construction or operation of marijuana establishments.
Motion. A couple seconds on a motion. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Carried unanimous. Okay. We're now on item number 27. I think I'm going to ask the city manager to hold his legislative report until tonight when we go through with the school board. That way we can hear them all at once. Any board members have anything they want to put up now? Anything? We can do it later if you want, but okay. Unless there's an objection, should we just we'll recess until 2 o'clock? Is that all right? All right. We're in recess until 2 p.m.